Now, members, we're going to resume to consider a motion of confidence in the Minister for Justice. I call on the Taoiseach to move the motion, and Taoiseach, then you have 20 minutes.
I'll be sharing my time with the Taoiseach. I move that this House has confidence in Minister Helen McEntee. We'll debate a lot of things over the next 2 hours, but I want to reiterate our thoughts are first and foremost with the school children and their carer who were so brutally and senselessly attacked last Thursday week. 2 remain in hospital this evening, and we hope they make a recovery. I also want to restate my gratitude to those who risked their lives to save other lives, and to thank the Gardaí, frontline workers, council workers, transport and retail workers of all nationalities for their response to the riots that ensued. Their response demonstrates the power of people working together, and I believe they and the public at large want us in this House to work together to make our capital streets safer. The issue of confidence is a distraction from that important work. I've known Minister Helen McEntee for nearly 20 years. I worked on her by-election campaign after the sad death of her father Shane, and I had the privilege of appointing her as Minister for European Affairs in 2017 when I first became Taoiseach to work alongside Minister Coveney and me on the important issue of Brexit. Helen is trustworthy, sincere, intelligent and loyal. She's someone I turn to in difficult times and is never afraid to show her mettle when challenged, as she has in the past week or two. I'm thankful for her work as Minister for Justice, carrying on my party's tradition of law and order, alongside a wide agenda of reform, cracking down on crime, helping victims, and improving access to justice. I believe her record speaks for itself. Recruitment to An Garda Síochána is recovering post-pandemic, with up to 800 new recruits entering Templemore this year alone. She's negotiated the highest budget for the Gardaí ever, over 20% higher than when she started in office in 2020. We now have the largest fleet of vehicles in the organisation's history, with around 100 Garda cars and vans, extra Garda cars and vans due by the end of this year. Gardaí will soon have body-worn cameras for the first time, with the first phase due to start in Dublin early next year. This will improve their safety as well as evidence gathering. Minister McEntee is introducing facial recognition technology to enable retrospective viewing of CCTV footage, freeing up thousands of hours of Garda time. Minister McEntee has already doubled the maximum sentence for assault causing harm, increased the sentence for conspiracy to murder from 10 years to life, increased the sentence for assaulting a Garda or emergency worker from 7 years to 12. She's also working to crack down on the proceeds of organised crime, and the number of gang-related murders has fallen significantly on her watch. She's working on the overhaul of archaic licensing and nighttime entertainment laws, reforming our defamation laws, modernising our outdated incitement to hatred and hate crime laws, creating a new dedicated family court. And I believe no minister has done more to combat violence against women than she has. She's also appointed more judges and has a plan to expand prison capacity. I know we need to ensure that people are safe and feel safe in Dublin city centre. I've committed as Taoiseach that the full resources of the state will be available to the Minister and Garda Commissioner, and I'll make sure that there's leadership and coordination from my office in that regard. We need a tough response to the riots, that's clear. But we also need to understand why some people reacted in the way they did, and to what extent the riots were orchestrated by subversive elements. These riots do not reflect the wishes of the vast majority of people living in Dublin's north inner city. I know that. Of the 48 arrests, only 4 were resident in Dublin 1. In politics we will always have disagreements, but I think there also needs to be a sense of proportion and balance, and unity in times of real crisis. The Sinn Féin motion of no confidence was a political stunt, unnecessary and counterproductive. People want us to work together to improve law and order, not just in Dublin, but across the whole country. Removing the Justice Minister and the Garda Commissioner, which is Sinn Féin policy, would be a victory for those who engaged in violence and incited violence on our streets. it would embolden them to strike again, and that above should be sufficient to vote with the government here tonight. Ceann Comhairle, I would not have confidence in a Sinn Féin member becoming Minister for Justice. I would not have confidence in a Sinn Féin member as Minister for Justice proposing the appointment of the next Garda Commissioner. Sinn Féin has talked a lot about horrific events unfolding in the Middle East, and rightly so, but they will not acknowledge war crimes that may have happened in this country. Crimes committed in our name by terrorists the Irish people always rejected. Crimes like the Enniskillen and Warrington bombings, in which children were killed. Their justification is reminiscent. It wasn't deliberate. They weren't being targeted. They were just collateral damage. Crimes like the murder of Garda Jerry McCabe, Patrick Kelly and Austin Stack. And of course, Sinn Féin politicians, when asked, and they're not asked often, will use every word imaginable to avoid admitting that these things were crimes and that the perpetrators were criminals who should be dishonoured, brought to justice and punished. That's why we cannot have a Sinn Féin Taoiseach, why we cannot have a Sinn Féin Justice Minister, and why we cannot have a Sinn Féin Defence Minister in the next government or any government. Ceann Comhairle, the events of the 23rd of November were a real shock and not something we're used to in Ireland, thankfully. We need to make sure that these were exceptional events, and I vow that we will. For those who are listening at home, I encourage you to come to Dublin City over the coming festive period to support our businesses and show solidarity with city centre communities. There is an increased Garda presence and it's highly visible, and we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that you are safe and feel safe at all times and get home safely too. Mar dúirt mé an seachtain sicáte, mar rialtas be míid gan stéanú ó thaobh saránaí agus níní a cosint. Beg na Gardaí na strádanna agus déanfaí siad aon rud atá ag teastáil annas go mthóí daoine sábháilte. As I said last week, as a government we will be relentless in protecting our citizens and defending our people and their property. The Gardaí will be on the streets and will be visible and will do whatever it takes to make sure people are safe and feel safe. Ceann Comhairle, it is an honour for me to express my full confidence in my friend and colleague, Deputy Helen McEntee. I commend this motion to the House.
Please. Ceann Comhairle, I'll also share with Deputy Minister Catherine Martin. Ceann Comhairle, the recent violence in Dublin could not be more serious. It cannot be tolerated in our democratic republic. It represents a challenge to all of us here to show that we have a politics which is capable of treating serious issues with urgency and with a focus on action. The sad reality is that this debate has nothing to do with the issues of policing in Dublin and divisive radicalisation. It is yet again solely about Sinn Féin pursuing its cynical and aggressive approach to opposition, an approach which puts electoral politics first in everything. It is an approach which seeks to intimidate opponents and journalists alike. And quite frankly, this cynicism and aggression continues to directly undermine the ability of our democratic institutions and democratically elected representatives to work constructively on issues. There is not even the faintest hint of sincerity in the attacks which Sinn Féin has launched on Minister McEntee in the past 2 weeks. At the core of Sinn Féin's attack is the claim by Deputy MacDonald that everyone could see the disorder coming and that the Minister did nothing in the face of demands for action. Deputy MacDonald has a privilege open to no other member of this House. She can set the political agenda at the start of most sitting days in leaders' questions. Deputy MacDonald has the freedom, almost unique in the democratic world, of the daily opportunity to raise any issue she wants. If she thinks that something dangerous is imminent, she can stand here and demand action with the certainty that it will receive widespread coverage. Yet, in spite of her claim that the dogs in the street knew a riot was about to happen, the Dáil record shows that in the past 3 months, in leaders' questions, she never once raised the violence she now says was obviously about to break out. Deputy MacDonald is one of the deputies for the North Inner City. She claims to have been aware of a rising tide of extremism, yet did not think it was important enough to come in here as a party leader and demand action. If Deputy MacDonald was concerned about Gardaí being abused on O'Connell Street, all she needed to do was consult her front bench, which includes unique expertise on such behaviour. If she thought criminal elements in the North Inner City were a threat, she might have been more open when answering questions about her personal support for the political career of a notorious violent criminal, a person with direct links to the nastiest gang ever seen in this city. After many years of close association with an organisation which Deputy MacDonald's own constituency organiser and former advisor to Michelle O'Neill last week told the High Court was criminal and terroristic, Sinn Féin continues to demand that basic standards accepted by every other party not be applied to its behaviour. It is true that in the past 12 months there have been an attempt by Sinn Féin to claim to be on the side of law and order. However, the defining characteristic of the party's approach to policing on both sides of the border has been its conditionality. Support has been given and withdrawn depending on what suits that party and whether one of its own members is being investigated or not. The truth is that we can all see through the opportunism and cynicism at the heart of this debate. It is a terrible statement about Sinn Féin's approach to serious issues that its first impulse after the violence was to see how to get political advantage out of it. In the appalling words of Deputy O'Reilly, which I hope she will have the decency to withdraw, Sinn Féin decided to, quote, take out Minister McEntee. For a party with Sinn Féin's connections, to call for an opponent to be taken out is not something we should allow to be normalised. There is no doubt that there are extremist elements at Ceann Comhairle who exploited the tragic stabbings on Parnell Square. As they have done in many other instances, they have sought to promote the idea of a rising conflict and the need for people to take direct action. They seek to exploit and develop fears and turn them into the type of aggressive divisions which have been common in far too many countries. Throughout the world, studies have shown that we are living in an age where polarisation is happening at a rapid pace, and that it is happening because it has been actively encouraged by forces on the left and the right. Political opponents are no longer being presented as people you disagree with, but as enemies and bad faith actors. Separate information bubbles are feeding this extremism and undermining the ability to have political debates focused on serious discussions rather than angry arguments. There is simply no way of denying that this is happening in Ireland as well. The language about take back our country and patriots defend our society and other such far-right language only needs to find a small audience for it to cause very serious damage. Where the aggression steps over the line and becomes threatening, we have to have the laws and the enforcement necessary to act. And just as importantly, we have to speak out against those who seek to promote and then exploit division. It also must be said that the atmosphere which feeds aggression and division is much wider, and there are those here who contribute to it. Nearly every person here who holds ministerial office has seen this in the rising number of cases of verbal abuse and intimidation. Look at how casually members of some parties accuse others of being traitors and betraying the nation, and you see people contributing to a dangerous atmosphere. Only this weekend, the People Before Profit group distributed leaflets in Cork city centre, which had the headline, "The police are not on our side." The previous weekend, hundreds stood by as the headquarters of the Department of Foreign Affairs was vandalised. In recent weeks, we've also seen loud abuse directed at members of a government on this issue, of Gaza, in spite of our active and almost unmatched support for the people of Gaza. If you promote aggression towards your opponents, if you sit in Parliament but claim the legitimacy of the street, if you ignore abuse by your own supporters against your opponents and against independent journalists, then you are directly feeding the atmosphere of aggressive and divisive activism we should all be opposing. Our thoughts at Ceann Comhairle are first and foremost with those who were shockingly attacked last weekend, the children and their carer. And we should all unite behind the work of An Garda Síochána and what they did last week. Minister McEntee and Commissioner Harris have been fully open and candid about what happened in Dublin. They have shown their personal commitment to taking action. I and my party will be voting confidence in the Minister today because we have far more faith in her commitment to action than we do in the cynical politics of personal aggression being shown by Sinn Féin. Thank you.
Mr. Catherine Martin, please.
Ceann Comhairle, Thomas Sauce and Desh Shaw all con large ar son and vote and Winina san Ara Helen McEntee. I am pleased to have the opportunity to speak today in support of the motion of confidence in the Minister for Justice Helen McEntee. First of all, I want to say that my thoughts are with the children and their carer who are subjected to that horrific attack in Dublin on the 23rd of November. Agus táim ag smaoinemh ormh go léir go háirithe na páistí a bhí gortathe. I want again to thank the first responders and An Garda Síochána for their selfless and brave actions on that day and in dealing with the appalling events that unfolded that evening. They represented the true values of our democratic state. And it is important for us as parliamentarians here today to acknowledge how we as a nation must continue to hold those values dear, particularly now in the face of an onslaught of online disinformation and misinformation, of harmful extremist content that preys on the vulnerable and incites hatred and violence. This is a real threat to our democracy, to the rule of law, to peace, to the very fabric of our state. Now is not the time to be playing petty party politics. It is not the time to stoke division or seek political instability. And it is certainly not the time to be looking for headlines and heads. Now is the time for unity of purpose across all parties. It is a time for us to work together in this chamber to support all efforts to protect the key pillars of our democracy. That is exactly what this government and Minister McEntee are doing. There has been a robust response to those violent events in Dublin on the 23rd of November. Over 30 people have been brought before the courts, and as Gardaí investigations continue, we will undoubtedly see more. A high-visibility policing plan is underway in the city centre, which will provide a reassuring visible presence. It will continue throughout the Christmas period and is supported by additional overtime provided by Minister McEntee, drawing in public order units, the dog and mounted units. And let us not forget that Minister McEntee has enacted and is enacting significant reforms to support our Gardaí, to protect our citizens and to make our country a safer place for all. She has increased investment in An Garda Síochána to the highest ever level, allowing for sustained ongoing investment into Garda recruitment. Numbers in Templemore continue to increase, and we are on track to have over 700 new recruits into the college in 2023. 237 new Gardaí have been recruited so far this year, with a further 151 to be attested later this month. A new Garda recruitment competition will open again in the coming weeks. Minister McEntee has been a proactive Minister for Justice, driving the modernisation of our laws to counteract hate crime and hate speech. That, coupled with our efforts to tackle the issue of disinformation and harmful content online, is fundamental to addressing the growth of violent extremism and the protection of our liberal democratic values. Minister McEntee has taken measures to tackle the grave issue of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence in our country. Among these is the establishment of a statutory agency dedicated to tackling and reducing domestic, sexual and gender-based violence and supporting victims and survivors. There is a huge body of important work underway in this area under her stewardship, important work that needs to continue. There is progress too in other areas of important legislation that will ultimately impact positively on all our daily lives in a wide variety of ways. The Criminal Justice Miscellaneous Provisions Bill contains measures targeting violent and organised crime, violence against Gardaí, and also has a particular focus on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. This includes impactful measures, such as the increase of the maximum penalty for assault causing harm, one of the most commonly prosecuted violent offences, from 5 to 10 years. The Sex Offenders Amendment Act improves post-release supervision of sex offenders and provides for electronic tagging. Coco's Law criminalises the distribution of intimate images without consent. The Recording Devices Bill provides for body-worn cameras to protect Garda members, automatic number plate recognition to detect crime and greater use of CCTV. The landmark Police and Security and Community Safety Bill provides for the establishment of a community safety partnership in every part of the country. This is only a small sample of the important work being done by Minister McEntee and her department, and there is so much more work underway. This is progress and action in the interests of the Irish people. These are clear, practical solutions that will have a positive impact on our daily lives. Not soundbites, not political games, but real practical change that will make a long-lasting difference. I have full support and confidence in the Minister for Justice. Tá mo winning agus mo glú haciacht ag an Ara McEntee agus giam gachra ar a cidibre.
Remagad anish an chapter MacDonald roint Kidama leis an chapter Daly agus O'Reilly.
Gurmaigat Ceann Comhairle. Ceann Comhairle, the streets of Dublin's north inner city haven't been safe for a long time. The area is scourged by open drug dealing, drug taking, on-street nuisance drinking, constant and threatening antisocial behaviour. It's in this abnormal atmosphere that people go about their daily lives. People make their journeys to work. Parents do the school drop-offs with the ever-present hum of menace, risk, and an overriding lack of personal safety. Over the course of Fine Gael's 12 years in government, people have been robbed of their safety. Garda stations have been closed or put on reduced hours. Community Garda numbers have been decimated. Gone are the days of the Garda on the beat, the very bedrock of effective community policing. And this has contributed to a general feeling of lawlessness and an unsafe environment. The response of government has been, at best, to skirt around the problem and, at worst, to completely abandon these communities. The school community of Gaelscoil Coláiste Mhuire recognise well that low, relentless hum of danger and lack of safety. The children, parents and staff live with it every day. Thursday, November 23rd started like any other day, but it turned out to be a day that they will never forget. None of us will. 3 small children and creche manager Leanne Flynn stabbed in broad daylight outside their school. Leanne bravely stood between the attacker and the children, risking her own life to save their young lives. Courageous members of the public, people who represent all that is good of Dublin, stepped in to apprehend the perpetrator and certainly prevented further harm. And what occurred in the aftermath of this horrific attack constituted a catastrophic, unprecedented collapse in public safety. Control of Dublin city centre was lost to a mob who sought to exploit the attacks to sow hate and division. As those poor children and Leanne received emergency treatment in hospital, there was mayhem and destruction on the streets of our capital city. Garda cars, buses and a Lewis tram burned out. Gardaí assaulted, emergency responders targeted, shops looted, retail workers, transport workers and citizens terrified. Everyone who stood their ground that evening deserves our praise and our thanks. Gardaí in particular are to be commended. They came under sustained attack. They were very much in the way of danger. This riot was entirely predictable. It was coming. The instigators didn't try to hide their intent. It was openly orchestrated immediately following the attacks. But there was no plan to respond. According to the GRA, the Garda Representative Association, no central instruction issued to Gardaí. They were left to organise themselves on WhatsApp. It's clear this riot compounded the fact that was compounded by the fact that there was not enough Gardaí at hand in order to support their colleagues. To be clear, I have full confidence in An Garda Síochána. I have zero confidence in the Minister for Justice. And in any other walk of life, in any other organisation, the person presiding over such a colossal failure would be sacked. Those who vote confidence in the Minister tonight are endorsing grave failure. Over the last 12 days, much has been said about the riots, but not enough has been said about what happened earlier that day, the stabbing of 3 small children and Leanne Flynn. The gravity and trauma of this horrific attack hasn't been fully acknowledged or fully understood. It took nearly 2 weeks for government to reach out to the school community. Many parents tell me that they feel forgotten, vulnerable and afraid. They are angry. Incredible work was done to get the children back to school, and I want to acknowledge Moonshore Paul Hansard and his staff. But it has to be asked, in the immediate aftermath of this attack, where was the emergency response from government? Only days after the stabbing of 3 of their classmates, and as Leanne Flynn lay in her hospital bed, it was back to business as usual for the area surrounding Gaelscoil Coláiste the Wirra. Strangers street drinking and not a Garda in sight. Those of us...
No, sorry. Please. Nobody interrupted anybody.
Those who live...
Sorry, but... What's the point of order? The Leader of the Opposition has quite disgracefully misled the Dáil. There was contact from government with the school within 24 hours of the events. Several ministers did so. She knows that. It's deliberate misleading and it should be withdrawn. And I call on her to be decent for once and withdraw it.
Please, I'd like, can we please conduct the business in an orderly fashion? When the turn returns to government to speak, you can refute what has been said by Deputy MacDonald. Now,
Should be withdrawn.
Fine, but are you going to withdraw it?
I am not.
Right.
I'm stating the facts on the record of the Dáil. Those who live... Those who live and work here, who walk these streets, who've grown up in Dublin and who love this city, know the score. The broken lives, broken spirits, broken health and bodies of the walking wounded. Government refers to them as vulnerable. I call them the brutalised, the forgotten, failed by government after government. By a system and a state that grinds them up and allows them to fall through the cracks, and then wrings its hands in faux outrage when we reach a horrific flashpoint. I refer to those who called the streets their home. Government should be held to account for the hardship that these people endure. Small children should never have to witness it or to bear or to shoulder that traumatising burden. They congregate in huddles. They congregate in our city centre. They've nowhere to go once the hostels chuck them out in the morning. And they gather every day at the Garden of Remembrance opposite Gaelscoil Coláiste the Wirra, and each and every one of them has their own heartbreaking story. They hang around. On Thursday, the 23rd of November, a random individual was hanging around the school, and there was nothing new or particularly alarming there. But on this day, a knife was produced, wounds were inflicted, blood spilt, children screamed, sirens wailed, words spread, and parents, hearts in their mouths, ran to the school. The panic was overwhelming. The fear, is my little one hurt? For 3 families, the news wasn't good. The nightmare of every parent came to pass, and for Leanne Flynn's family, a horrifying reality dawned. Let me be clear. The only person responsible for that stabbing nightmare is the perpetrator. Those responsible for the riot were the rioters. But it is the responsibility of the Minister for Justice to ensure that our streets are safe, to ensure that in Garda Síochána have the resources that they need. And she failed in these responsibilities abysmally, with very dire consequences. Bhí an Tara McEntee I gceannas nuair a hit an fólíneacht in our bríomh cathair as sa chéile. Ní féidir léithí fannacht sa fust, caithí sí imacht. For a very long time now, our streets haven't been safe. Despite communities and businesses crying it from the rooftops, there has been no step change or urgency from government. But that change has to start now. Even in these darkest of times, I believe we can turn the tide back in favour of community. With the right policies and determination from government, confidence in public safety can be restored and strengthened. Our communities and the Gardaí who we send out to uphold public safety deserve that. It's time to make public safety the priority, to give Gardaí the support and resources they need, to put more Gardaí on the streets and to invest in strong, compassionate communities. You say that we are politicising this issue. So let me say it clearly. There is nothing more political than keeping people safe. In fact, the first responsibility of any government worthy of the name is to keep its citizens safe. And to make sure this happens, we need a major change of direction. But Minister McEntee has proven incapable of providing the leadership, the direction and the purpose needed to make our streets and our communities safe. The Minister's position is untenable and she must go.
5.5 minutes remaining, Deputy Daly.
We have no choice but to bring this motion. We have no choice because the problems are so serious. They have been raised but not addressed in an adequate way. We highlighted the problems that existed and continue to exist within criminal justice. We said there was a crisis with Garda morale. The Minister said there was no crisis. We said you need to complete the new regulations for Garda Reserve in order to improve presence on the street, something demanded by retailers, workers who feel unsafe, shoppers and Gardaí, but we're still waiting. The various representatives for justice who stood here from Fine Gael maintained that a target of 1,000 new Gardaí this year would be met, when clearly from early summer that target was unachievable. Maintaining that mantra damaged government credibility. The number of serving guards has decreased year on year over the past 4 years. I know and accept that morale in An Garda Síochána is in crisis. Many guards are buying back their pensions in order to leave early. Resignations are at an all-time high. And coming down the tracks is the cohort of Gardaí who joined in the mid-90s when recruitment reopened after the intake of guards had slowed in the late 80s and early 90s. In the medium term, we need to recruit from the new communities, and that's accepted by An Garda Síochána. In the short term, we need to allow Gardaí management to recruit reservists, which they haven't been able to do since 2017. There's been no urgency in helping Gardaí to achieve this, and government hasn't listened, or if they have not delivered. We could have waited for Fine Gael to make a decision, like it did with 2 of its previous 3 justice ministers, but it wasn't going to this time. If we thought it would hasten change or bring more presence on the streets or increase Garda numbers and make people feel safe in the communities, retailers, emergency services, workers and Gardaí, then we would. But we don't have confidence that that's going to happen after 13 years of Fine Gael in government. There are less Gardaí in the streets, less Garda stations, and in order to solve the problems of morale, loss of control and resources, the government and minister needs to acknowledge the problems. Instead, government spokespersons have engaged in distraction and delusion. Instead of solid proposals, we heard a drum roll of predictably tougher legislation. Strangely, the need for clarity on the use of force, and a word, chillingly, the bizarre proposal to cut social welfare, as reported from your parliamentary party meeting, none of which would have prevented the unprecedented crime or the loss of control that happened on the 23rd of November. All of that has convinced me that this government is incapable of dealing with and solving the problems on our streets, incapable of making people safe, and the consequences are what we saw last Thursday week. It's clear that the government is out of touch, has lost credibility on these issues, and crucially is not listening, and the Minister is not listening. We are saying we've had enough, and to vote no confidence in the Minister for Justice.
2.5 minutes remaining, Deputy O'Reilly.
Our capital city has an undeniable buzz, community spirit and rich history, and I am very proud to be a Dub. However, there is no denying that parts of the city centre have become dangerous, derelict and run down in recent years. This didn't happen by accident. This is a whole of government failure, but it has become encapsulated by the continual failure on the part of the Minister for Justice. The recent riots and the loss of control of Dublin city centre is part of a broader failure on this Minister's part. The past year has seen a litany of violent attacks which have highlighted how bad the situation has become. The situation has been broadcast around the country and to the world. Indeed, parents warn their children of the dangers of Dublin City in the same way that embassies are now warning their citizens. And these are just the stories which lead the news cycle. There are countless acts of violence which go unreported and unrecorded. And is it any wonder, with 500 fewer Gardaí on the streets? So what's the point in calling when you know that the station is understaffed and they're not going to be able to send someone out? And it gives me no pleasure, Minister, to highlight these issues or to point out that Dublin city centre has not felt safe for a long time. But I have no faith that things will get better with this Minister or under this government. And this is not something to be laughed at, Minister. I'm glad you can knock some sport out of it. This is incredibly serious. I have no faith that things will get better with you or with your government. Your record speaks loudly, and the fact that there are nearly 500 fewer guards on the beat in Dublin City is a measure of your lack of sincerity. For years, Sinn Féin and others have proposed solutions and called for these issues to be addressed. Investment in the Gardaí, increased numbers and equipment, investment in disadvantaged communities, youth clubs, sports facilities, jobs club and so on, investment in education, further education, investment in supporting employment and re-employment. Furthermore, Minister, business owners in the city centre have shared with me umpteen times their concerns about the impact of this everyday crime and violence on their businesses. Shoplifting, break-ins and threats to staff are sadly all too common. For over a year, some Dublin City-based business groups have been requesting a meeting with you, Minister, regarding crime and antisocial behaviour, but it was only in the immediate aftermath of the riots that that was granted. Workers have shared with me their experience of violence, abuse and harassment as they work in the city centre. That's happening when they're in work, when they're going to work and when they're coming home from work. Does this sound like a safe city? Does it sound like a city that the Minister has engaged with? Does it sound like a city that the government cares about? Not to me, not on the basis of your current and past performance. And it is for that reason that we have no confidence in this Minister.
Deputy O'Riordan.
Ceann Comhairle, after careful consideration of the track record of this government in the areas of crime, policing and addressing the root causes of crime, the Labour Party will not be supporting the government's motion. We did not rush to political point scoring in the aftermath of November the 23rd. We were traumatised when the news filtered through of a vicious assault on innocent school children and their carer. That shock was compounded when we saw images of law and order breaking down in the centre of our beloved city. We didn't look for political advantage. We didn't join the calls for the Minister or Commissioner to resign, as our first instinct was to focus on the far right and the depleted and demoralised state of An Garda Síochána. The time for political accountability has now arrived. It is important in a debate as partisan as this to point to the Minister's successes. Her advancement on the Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Agency Bill is to her credit. Her support of Brendan Howland's COCO's Law initiative to criminalise the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, her move to tackle stalking and sexual harassment, and her prioritisation of hate crime legislation. These measures are dismissed by some in this chamber as culture war issues. Tell that to the parents of cyber-bullied suicidal children, to women who have been sexually assaulted, raped or beaten to a pulp in their own homes, or to those who live under the constant fear of being attacked for who they are. So, Minister, you have had your successes and we have worked with you to achieve them. And your failures are not yours alone. They must be shared across government, and the government needs to take responsibility for them. It is a cross-government failure to properly resource An Garda Síochána, to bring the Garda numbers up to a level needed to match the increase in the size of the Irish population and the changing nature of modern policing. It makes no sense that we have a Garda force at the same level it was 20 years ago, with a population which has grown by over 1 million people in that time. There's a lack of civilinisation in the Garda force, 20% here compared to 50% in the UK, leading to more Gardaí doing more administration than ever before. It is a cross-government failure to not tackle the morale, recruitment and retention issue in An Garda Síochána. The statistics don't lie in terms of Garda resignations in 2023. 142 at the end of October this year, 5 times the number of 2013. The Gardaí threatened industrial action in October, which was averted at the last minute. You still insist on policing this city on overtime. The promised 1,000 extra Gardaí has not materialised, with only 633 trainees entering Templemore this year and an intake from January being brought forward to Christmas in an apparent attempt to massage the figures. Even in this debate, the Taoiseach has said the number is 800, Minister Martin has said the number is 700, the Garda Commissioner has said the number is 633. It is a cross-government failure to properly tackle the far right. No myth-busting public information campaign to dispel the lies they are propagating. It appears the government feels that they'll wear themselves out. So if they close down libraries or burn out tents or riot at the Dáil or block the Port Tunnel or place blockades on roads or spread misinformation online or protest at accommodation centres, they'll eventually get tired. Well, they didn't. They just set O'Connell Street on fire. Your failure is threatening the safety of everyone they target. You have also isolated Minister O'Gorman and given him zero cross-departmental support. We're now at the point where, at the very moment people of colour are feeling most uneasy about wandering the streets of Dublin, you've decided you can no longer put a roof over the heads of people seeking international protection. What a colossal failure. It is a cross-governmental failure to engage in genuine reform of our prison system, our drug policy, or to properly tackle the causes of social exclusion. Our prison system is vastly overcrowded. In September, the Inspector of Prisons criticised the degrading conditions in some overcrowded prisons. Governors tell me too many prisoners are there because of addiction issues or mental health challenges. Your response? We need more prison spaces. On drug reform, you've shown no appetite to grab the historic opportunity the Drug Citizens Assembly has offered you. 6,400 people charged with possession for personal use alone this year. A complete waste of Garda time, but you've shown no vision for change. Disgracefully, you've made no effort to open the medically supervised injecting facility, even as a mobile service, because the lives lost to addiction are not a high priority for your government. Your rhetoric in these last 12 days gives us no confidence that you have a real interest in addressing the root causes of crime. Those young people on the edges, seeking empowerment and respect, so vulnerable to a drug gang or a hate movement, who knows what buttons to press, and you have handed them more material. They need a good, honest beating. Social welfare deducted from them, and you use the term scumbags. There isn't a youth worker in the city who doesn't think that you've all made their jobs more difficult. Would you call a tax-evading farmer, businessman or banker a scumbag? DESH principals have begged you to address intergenerational trauma within the most acutely disadvantaged children, and you've said you'll review it in 2024. And the very section of An Garda Síochána that can do the most in building relationships on the ground, fixing issues before they start, Community Gardaí, is the area under most strain from your failures. Housing is still a national disaster, with thousands of children in sheltered accommodation. We won the highest overdose rates in Europe. 23% of Irish workers are in low-paid work. Minister, you have to deal with the issues we have raised. You can't accuse us of playing politics. You can't accuse us to have acted inappropriately, as it wasn't us who produced photographs of vulnerable individuals in the Dáil chamber. You can't shout Jonathan Dowdall, the IRA or the Special Criminal Court at us. You can't accuse us of playing both sides on immigration in local communities, as you know that is not the Labour Party way. Your post-riot announcements regarding the policing authority and Twitter have both been flatly contradicted by those involved. We have no confidence in your government's management of justice issues in our country. The people of Ireland deserve so much better. They deserve vision, ambition and an agenda with social justice burning at its core. We're not playing politics. We didn't ask for this debate. If you've asked this House to place confidence in you, we cannot do that for the reasons I have outlined.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Deputy. Now, Minister Paschal Donoghue sharing with Ministers Knoxon, Butler, O'Donnell and Hale.
Count Corla, I stand to articulate my support for Minister McEntee and for this motion as a government colleague, but also as a TD for Dublin Central. And before I outline the reasons for my support for Minister McEntee, I want to address what was a disgraceful and at times disturbing speech from the Leader of the Opposition. In her speech, she alleged that it was up to 2 weeks before Gwelstal Galosh de Wira heard from government representatives. Not only is that wrong, you also know that is wrong. You know it is wrong. And you make a charge like that, continuing your form of politics, which is about division, which is about how you can sow distrust, which is how you can undermine the good intentions of anyone in this chamber who doesn't sit with you. And you do that to create the perception, the illusion of a state that is uncaring, a state that doesn't engage. Nowhere in your contribution, from you or from any of your speakers so far, was the recognition that within hours of this terrible tragedy and this terrible trauma being inflicted on a school that I am privileged to represent with other members of this House, that NEPS workers, that representatives of the state were engaging with them, were supporting them. What you seek to do is create the perception of an uncaring, unfocused state not capable of responding back at a time of great need, when the reality is that politicians on these benches, were contacting the school, which is really only beside the point, because what they needed was care, what they needed was support and engagement at a professional level from our psychologists, from the Department of Education, from the HSE, which was provided to them, which they needed and which was made available. They are the facts. And what you seek to do here is create instead a vision, a rhetoric of lack of care, lack of compassion. Well, you can question this government, you can question any member of this House on the grounds of their competence, on the grounds of what they have done. But it's when you seek to qualify and seek to challenge people on the basis of their compassion, on the basis of their care, that you move into the kind of politics that is incapable of providing solidarity, incapable of providing unity, exactly at a time communities and all those who were affected by those dark moments needed. We have in Minister McEntee, and let me say this, Count Corla, because I have experienced what those awful moments have done to the communities that I am privileged to represent. There is nobody I would far rather have representing this state as Minister for Justice than Helen McEntee. Her compassion, her empathy, her steeliness in rising to this challenge is what we need. We know we have more work to do. We know we have more that needs to be done. But exactly at the moment when our country needed unity, Sinn Féin offered division.
Thank you, Minister.
When our communities needed stability, you offered instability.
Thank you, Minister.
And when people wanted calmness and moderation, all you had was a loud and angry voice. We have a minister here who understands what needs to be done, who is doing it, and because of that, she has my support and that of the government.
Sorry to interrupt, but there are 4 more speakers.
Thank you, Laskin Corla. I support this motion of confidence in my colleague Minister Helen McEntee. It's very easy for the opposition to say that the Minister and the Gardaí should have known that a major public order incident was going to break out in Dublin city centre. But how could they? How could they foretell the malign intent of some people that led them to incite a riot, especially following a tragedy where children and their care worker were so brutally attacked in the middle of the day? Gardaí have successfully policed over 700 protests so far this year. Some of these protests have been bad-tempered, with individual colleagues across this House directly targeted. But there have been no expressions of support from Sinn Féin for our frontline Gardaí. Why? Because they cannot acknowledge good policing. Because they want to politicise, personalise and attack not only the Justice Minister, but our Garda Commissioner. I also want to raise one particular aspect of Sinn Féin's reaction to recent events. As part of my brief in the Department of Health, I meet with people in drug and alcohol addiction and those who provide the services to help them. I have never posted a picture or a video on social media of a vulnerable person in need of help. Sinn Féin, on the other hand, last week used a picture of a clearly identifiable and vulnerable man for a cheap publicity stunt. It was posted on the Sinn Féin leader's social media account, which has almost 200,000 followers, and waved around this House during leaders' questions. A baseless connection was made between someone in addiction being a danger to children and the wider public. An innocent person was put forward as someone to be feared and avoided. Laskin Corla, we know the truth now. The mask of Sinn Féin has slipped. There isn't one vulnerable group that Sinn Féin won't use for their own political ends. That man is someone's son, perhaps someone's brother or someone's father. God knows what they're going through. And you used him.
We're running out of time.
How nasty, how cheap, how typically Sinn Féin.
The party of political opportunism strikes again. Sinn Féin weren't so opportunistic back in 2020 when they had the chance to go into government. They chose instead to avoid the responsibility and leave the job of leading the country through a pandemic to someone else, thankfully. Sinn Féin decided that they would take the course which benefited them most. They chose to sit on the sidelines in opposition and seek to make political capital of every issue which faces our country. And here we go again. Even the horses and the greyhounds saw another policy U-turn last week. The party of sloganeering and soundbites were out in force across media, following the riots with no other motive than political gain. The hypocrisy has been astounding. Nobody is safe. Last week we saw a photo of a vulnerable man who clearly had his own personal issues, used for political gain, here in the chamber and on social media. Where is your moral compass or even your basic decency? Sinn Féin know they would lose this vote by a very clear margin. Their only objective here is to keep this in the news cycle so they can continue to snipe and chirp from the sidelines about the Justice brief. Isn't it a pity they aren't so forthright when it comes to speaking on their own justice policies? The party which doesn't support the Special Criminal Court, the court which convicted their party leader's good friend, their donor and Sinn Féin stalwart, Jonathan Dowdall. A long-standing party policy which is a slap in the face to victims of organised crime and our security services. Sinn Féin claim to know what is best for our Gardaí. Does this include Detective Jerry McCabe, his convicted killers shoulder high at their Ardèche in 2009?
Deputy Kieran O'Donnell is the last speaker in this slot.
Like everyone else, our thoughts are with the 5-year-old girl and the creche worker who is still recovering in hospital, because that's why we're all here today. And I've absolute confidence in Minister for Justice Helen McEntee. It's 12 days since the riots took place in Dublin, and I want to put the contrast in the behaviour of Sinn Féin and the Minister for Justice. Within a day, Louise O'Reilly was calling for a head, and to take the Minister out. It sent a chilling feeling. That reminds me of further past times. And it was chilling, it was unnecessary, it was irresponsible by Sinn Féin. Furthermore, Minister Helen McEntee has been out, public, working with the Garda Commissioner, reassuring the public, putting extra resources in place. And Sinn Féin's behaviour today, and for the last 12 days, has been nothing short of irresponsible. The public want the political parties to unite. You were not listening to the public. You saw it in polls recently, and effectively the public wanted you to work with government. You're either for democracy or law and order, or you're not. And at the end of the day, you should have come out immediately. This is an affront on democracy. This was thuggish, right-wing behaviour. The ordinary person, the length and breadth of Ireland, was absolutely appalled at what happened. And what did Sinn Féin do? They certainly weren't listening to the public. I'm wondering who they were listening to.
Thank you, Minister.
And I think we have a minister here who has effectively listened to the public, been proactive, and made Ireland, and more particularly Dublin City, a safer place.
I stand here expressing full confidence in Minister McEntee and her work in building stronger, safer communities across Ireland. Victims of the attack outside Gaelscoil Colostum, who are foremost in our thoughts, deserved a united response of solidarity from all sides of this House. Our Gardaí, who faced down rioters and those looting shops, deserved a united response of solidarity from all sides of this House. Our Gardaí and our frontline emergency workers, who undertake dangerous work every day in public service, know they have a united response from this government and some members of this House. But at a time when Minister McEntee, Commissioner Harris and government are building momentum on recruitment through Templemore, strengthening supports for Gardaí, Sinn Féin can only think of the political playbook, which is all they know. Last week, Deputy MacDonald stood in this House and spoke for nearly 10 minutes. And I didn't pick up one single solution or change vision or difference that would be articulated in a different Sinn Féin approach. Piers Doherty in Morning Ireland the next morning did a similar length interview, and when pushed at the very end, the only new solution he could come up with was magic up new Gardaí. But no vision, no alternative. You know, Deputy MacDonald, again, a full speech, full of rhetoric. You referenced faux outrage, which is rich when we see how Sinn Féin used the school in Parnell Square, its building vulnerable people as props and pawns in your political game. Sinn Féin promise change, but I don't see it. I don't see it except the dark, sinister forces that would like to change how justice has prevailed in this country because of your Sinn Féin background. A portfolio that you wouldn't even be let hold up in Northern Ireland, never mind here.
Arashka Sinn Féin, ich have the Mark Ward.
The government has accused Sinn Féin's attempt to hold the government to account as a distraction. I put to you that Fine Gael must have been distracted for the last 12 years as you held the Justice portfolio. You were so distracted that under your watch, under Fine Gael's watch, there are almost 500 less Gardaí in Dublin since you came into government. You were so distracted when 2 Gardaí who were on overtime from Rolandstown in my area were brutally attacked in Ballyfermot. Were you distracted when a rocket was fired at a Gardaí at a protest? Were you distracted when the rank and file Gardaí voted no confidence in the Garda Commissioner? Were you distracted when the US Embassy warned our citizens that Dublin was not safe? And were you distracted when Dublin burned 2 weeks ago? As a father whose children also attended a Gael school, I was appalled by the barbaric attack on 3 children and their carer outside Gael School, Coláiste Mire. The level of destruction and lawlessness that followed in my city last week was unacceptable and it was inexcusable. But this does not happen in isolation. You have allowed things to escalate. You constantly mention 3,000 Garda vehicles. Minister, do you know how many Garda vehicles were available in Clondalkin and Ballyfermot on one day last week? 1 Garda car for a whole area, a really disadvantaged area. Our communities feel abandoned by Fine Gael. You walked around Dublin with a fine Garda escort and you declared our city safe. I've worked as an outreach worker, meeting some of the hardest to reach members of society in our city and in our suburbs. I've lived in Dublin my whole life, and for the first time, I don't feel as safe here. You've allowed law and order to disintegrate under your watch. And Minister, the reason I have no confidence in you as Minister, in order to fix the problem, you have to recognise there is a problem. You believe that Dublin is safe. Workers and families will disagree with you. The escalation of violence in my city will contradict you. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So replacing one failed Fine Gael Justice Minister with another Fine Gael Justice Minister will not bring about the change that is needed. Minister, I have no confidence in the Minister, yourself as Minister of Justice, and I have no confidence in this government.
Ich habe the circuit clerk.
The locals around Parnell Square, and in fact the parents and teachers of the children in Glasgow, Coláiste Mire, will tell you that there has been a worsening antisocial behaviour element surrounding that area for years. Yet it has taken the brutal attack of children and their carer for the Minister to do the job for which he was appointed. In a ministerial position of justice, where people's lives can be on the line, it is important to be proactive, not merely reactive, something that this Minister has simply failed to be. Why has it taken the stabbing of children and their carer and rioting that resembled something from a dystopian film to pledge ranges of actions for Garda effectiveness? There is no excuse for the way Gardaí were left high and dry that day. Control was lost, something that should have been foreseen was not, and a proper response was not put in place in time, which led to an escalation of violence, looting and destruction. And this is not just in Dublin, it is replicated across the country. In my own constituency, in Longford, there is 1 community Garda on duty Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, for a town of 11,000 people. At a time when on Garda Síochána there are communicate numerous potential threats to the community. The front page of the Athlone topic recently, written with the Assistance Minister of Gardaí at different ranks in that district, had an underlying comment of shared concerns and fears that the downgrading of Athlone Garda Station would have on the town, the residents, businesses and Gardaí themselves. Minister, they can't all be wrong. We need new leadership. We need a better vision. We need a Minister for Justice who will actually step up and ensure that the necessary resources are put in place to guarantee public safety for all. It's not fair on residents, it's not fair on Gardaí. And I say that as somebody, Minister, that the Gardaí in Mullingar frequently come to seeking the CCTV footage from my constituency office.
Social Democrats, ich habe the Catherine Murphy.
Safe is one of the key functions of government. I'd characterise it as a critical civil liberty. Just saying the city is safe, as you've done several times, Minister, doesn't mean that the city is safe. What was particularly shocking about the riot in Dublin was the lack of preparation for such an eventuality, or better still, a plan to prevent it from happening in the first place. Niall Hodgkins of the GRA on prime time on the 28th of November said there was no plan, members turned up simply because WhatsApp messages were being passed from Garda to Garda. He said the Garda Síochána is a hierarchical organisation, yet no instruction came down to members. Since the pandemic, it has been clear that there's been an alignment between different groups and social media. There's also international links with these groups, with far-right groups, including links to UK white nationalist groups, where they share recruitment methods, tactics for protests. It has been reported that the policing board raised concerns about the growing challenge posed by the far-right in Ireland months ago. Earlier this year, the Garda Commissioner said the far-right has failed to grow in Ireland, bucking trends seen in other European countries. By November the 3rd, the Commissioner agreed to review the strategic guidance document on the policing of protests following a meeting with Forster, who had criticised the soft approach to policing the far-right. In August, when 4 British tourists were set upon in Temple Bar, one of the 4 told the Journal that passers-by said to him that attacks happen here regularly. The doctor said that these incidents happen a few times a week. In August, the same journal examined the CSO statistics on recorded crime in the Dublin Central, North and South districts. The article went on to quote Deirdre Healy, Director of the Institute of Criminology and Criminal Justice in UCD's School of Law, says that assaults tend to go underreported to Gardaí relative to other types of crime. It can create an inaccurate measure of what is actually happening. She said that the CSO survey in 2019 found that only 29% of victims report such incidents. Healy said that the dark figure of crime statistics had been a constant in the national records for a number of decades and usually results in around 70% of assaults not being reported. The report, Travelling in a Woman's Shoes, was published last year, and it found that slightly less than a quarter of Dublin women and 11% nationally had witnessed violent behaviour or sexual harassment happening to someone else on public transport, which is a critical area. The conclusion is that that's not rare. What has the Minister for Justice done with the memo to Cabinet that was brought as early as July 2016? The memo provided for the expansion of the strength of Garda Síochána to a total headcount of 21,000. It was to be composed of 15,000 Gardaí, 2,000 reserves and 4,000 civilians. There are currently less than 13,000 Gardaí. Yet the population has grown significantly since then. Those numbers are needed if we're to have any hope of a proactive style of policing. Antoinette Cunningham of the AGSI recently criticised the model of policing in Ireland, claiming it was more focused on reactive policing over preventative policing. Minister, if you don't prevent crimes from happening, then you spend the time investigating and prosecuting them. This has to be a watershed moment.
My vote today is not intended to be personal towards any one individual. My vote today is in the name of those who love the city of Dublin, those who engage with it, those who live there, those who work there, those who wish to send their children to school there safely. Confidence in any form derives from a sense of feeling secure. And it has been a very, very long time since anybody who's engaged in the city of Dublin in the manners that I've outlined have felt in any way secure. The vote I take today will be in that name. People who engage in the city, particularly pronounced, is that feeling of unsafety are for women, has already been outlined. For minorities, the evidence is very clear there. But what about people who just want to engage in the city, as would be in the norm in any other part of the country, in any other city? Who amongst us would wish to send our teenagers to the city of Dublin to go to a cinema, for example? That never used to be the case, that people were afraid to do that. But this is the sense where we've got to. And simply that isn't the norm that we should have to accept. Much has been made of the need to come together, to work in collaboration. I honestly can't step away from the fact, for the best part of 2.5 years now, we have sought that collaboration. We have literally proposed motions. It was a week ago and a year to this very day that we had statements in this chamber where ministers came in on the safety in the city of Dublin. We saw collaboration, but we haven't received anything back. So in the absence of that collaboration, Minister, and I haven't heard from you in relation to collaboration, in the absence of that, it's only justifiable that we now seek accountability for those decisions that are being made with increasingly worsening conditions in the north inner city. This is not about any one individual's compassion. Far from it. It's often said that nobody has a monopoly on compassion. I don't believe that. This is about state indifference. This is about state neglect of a community. And if you walk through the community that I grew up in, the north inner city, you could not help feel that neglect. It reverberates off the walls. So this is what my vote will be in the name of today. It was a point made to me last week. In any other part of the country, parents' councils assemble to get a new playing pitch, to hold bake sales, to raise money for the Christmas party. In the north inner city, for too long, parents' councils, groups of parents have engaged with me as a public rep and others too, just in the manner of safety, so that kids don't have to walk to school through plumes of smoke, so that kids don't have to leave school and see people, vulnerable people, in various states of intoxication, open drug dealing, open drug injection. That is not the norm anywhere else, and I will not accept it for the norm of my community. There will be no return to normality. So I don't believe that those who have been charged with the administration of justice in my city, while I've watched that decline over a decade, are the ones to fix it. There's any number of issues that could be raised, but when I vote today, I'll be naming the people who love and engage in our city.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 6 or 7 speakers in this slot of 11 minutes. Minister Roderick O'Gorman, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Last Count Corla. When this government was formed, our programme for government clearly stated that Ireland was facing an epidemic of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. And over the last 3.5 years, Minister McEntee has been absolutely emphatic in her response to this, prioritising the issue like no minister before her. She is providing leadership in tackling violence against women, a topic that was left unaddressed by successive governments for too long. She's unveiled an ambitious new 5-year zero-tolerance plan to tackle domestic, sexual and gender-based violence and ensure that all aspects of government are involved. She listened to those working on the front line against domestic violence and has spearheaded a new domestic violence agency, for the first time bringing together the fragmented responsibility for this issue into one organisation. She's overseen a substantial increase in funding for NGOs responding to DSGBV, an additional 12 million in budget 2024 alone, and has outlined a clear pathway to doubling the number of refuge spaces. And she's prioritised legislation to keep women safe, increasing the maximum penalty for assault causing harm, introducing a new standalone offence of non-fatal strangulation, championing an offence of stalking and strengthening the law around harassment, and passing Coco's law, criminalising non-consensual distribution of intimate images. And I think it is really important that we call out that pernicious suggestion that's featured in the last couple of days, a suggestion that somehow domestic violence isn't a real justice issue, a suggestion that it's somehow a soft focus issue, and that is a suggestion that is based fundamentally in misogyny. Domestic violence is a crime. It's a crime deserving the commitment, the dedication and the effectiveness shown by Minister McEntee. It's a crime that this government is determined to continue to addressing. And I'm grateful to Minister McEntee for her leadership in tackling this issue, as I am at so much else she has advanced across her brief. She has my full confidence and I'll be supporting her this evening.
Minister Jack Chin.
Thanks, Lascan Corda, and like others, my thoughts are with the children and the carers who were subjected to that horrific attack, and I have full confidence in the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee. Minister McEntee is a person of absolute integrity and dedication, committed to reforming our justice system to make Ireland and our communities a safer place for all. On justice issues, I have absolutely zero confidence in Sinn Féin. I have zero confidence in Sinn Féin as a party giving the Gardaí the support they need to deal with the far right who want to undermine and destroy our country. Sinn Féin have seen a political opportunity and seized on the recent horrific events for their own political gain. This is pure political exploitation at a time when we have a sinister movement trying to undermine the very foundations of our state. And Sinn Féin wants to talk about justice. Well, here's your record on justice. You seek to politicise policing at every turn, north and south. You continuously sow division in communities by undermining the Gardaí and our Commissioner. And you undermine the state's effort to tackle organised crime and terrorism by continuously sitting on the fence on the Special Criminal Court. That's your record on justice. And who exactly does Sinn Féin have confidence in? They have confidence in people who've collected Garda killers from prison. They have confidence in kangaroo courts and their own unique brand of rough justice. They have confidence in some members of their own parliamentary party who tried to storm government buildings, who tried to break the line of Gardaí on our streets. And we saw at the last election, they have confidence in party members who continuously talk about breaking the state. It doesn't surprise me that Sinn Féin opposed the security of the state so routinely when many of its own members have come to the attention of our Gardaí. People don't want political games. People don't want heads on plates. They want An Garda Síochána and our Justice Minister united with grown-up politics, and they want to fight against those who instigate disorder, division and destruction on our streets. And I have full confidence in Minister McEntee.
Minister Richmond.
Like others, my first thoughts speaking here this evening are of course with the victims of that tragic attack Thursday a week ago. But I rise here last County to state my absolute 100% confidence in Helen McEntee as Minister for Justice, in her record as Minister for Justice and her response to those tragic events of the last week or so. Last County, over the last couple of days, we've had the provisional propaganda machine telling us all that we need to listen, speaking about listening. But I have to ask the Leader of the Opposition, has she done any listening? Has she done any listening to the people in her own constituency, the businesses, the publicans, the workers, the restaurateurs, who all they hear from her and her party over the last 10 days is absolute nonsense, talking down the city that so many of us love, talking down the businesses, putting those businesses, Deputy Doherty, as you shake your head, at risk. Many of them don't know if they'll reopen their doors after Christmas. Many of their workers do not know if they'll have a job to return to. But rather than uniting behind our capital, getting people back in, driving that sense of safety and cooperation, we have once again, on average, every 3 months, Sinn Féin put down a no-confidence motion in a government minister. They have absolutely zero ideas how to be an opposition party, and Lord knows what they do if they're a government party or, God forbid, they take over the Ministry for Justice. I am proud of Helen McEntee as the Minister for Justice. I'm proud of her record. I'm proud of my party's political tradition going back to the foundation of the state, the foundation of Garda Síochána, and I know my political record that my party's political tradition does not haunt families and communities around this state, north, south, east, west, to this day.
Minister Madigan.
Thank you, I first of all want to give my unequivocal support to Minister McEntee. On a personal level, I want to thank her for her incredible work around domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. It has been phenomenal, and the Taoiseach was right to say that she is the first minister to really tackle it in a really serious way. I have to say, Last Count Corla, I listened to what Minister Donoghue said earlier on in response to Deputy MacDonald's comments in relation to the school and in relation to the assistance that they received. As a minister in the Department of Education, I have to say I'm absolutely gobsmacked by what the Deputy MacDonald has said. If it is the case that Deputy MacDonald knows that the school has received assistance from NEPS, not within 2 weeks, Deputy, within hours. NEPS Education Psychological Service was in the school by 2 o'clock that day. And you're saying here, as a fact, Mary Lou Trump, fake news, that the school received no assistance for 2 whole weeks. Now, I would ask you seriously to withdraw that comment, because it's completely incorrect. Last County, you might ask the Deputy to do that.
Your time is running. I'm just warning if your time is actually running.
You have public order Pierce here and Mary Lou Trump. Like, how can anybody believe anything that comes out of your mouth when you talked earlier to the Taoiseach, you spoke to him and questioned him about facts in relation to rents. Well, that is a fact, Deputy MacDonald, and I ask you to withdraw that comment.
Deputy. There's no discussion. No, sorry, the time is, just let me clarify something. The Minister has asked you to withdraw something. I understand you're not withdrawing it. No, that's okay. I'm moving on. Deputy Frank Feehan, please, 2 minutes. Deputy Frank Feehan, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Some years ago, my great friend, the late TD, Lewis J. Belton, commented at a Fine Gael Parliamentary Party meeting that you can't have law without order. In the last few years, maybe because of abuse of social media and the spread of fake news, that Ireland has changed. There is a lot of anger and vicious abuse of people, particularly public representatives and those in responsible authority, which are driven by cowards who incite others behind the veil of social media stories and far-fetched theories. It is my strong belief that Minister McEntee, Commissioner Harris, his management team, the Gardaí have and will have the resources and the determination to deal with this ominous threat and to ensure that the perpetrators of this violence on the streets of our capital will not get the same opportunities to strike again with the same level of violence and damage as witnessed 10 years ago. I met Commissioner Harris many years ago, and he said, gave me great advice. He said, sometimes people make poor choices. I believe Sinn Féin on this occasion, with this motion of confidence, are making a very poor choice, and I think you know it. This is not the time to play politics with a serious issue. This is the time to unite, to demonstrate your loyalty and solidarity to this state and the Gardaí. Since the outbreaks of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, many of the perpetrators of violence and murder against our Gardaí have never been brought to justice. Like those who murdered Garda recruit Gary Sheehan and Private Patrick Kelly in Barnamore in my constituency of Sligo-Leitrim 40 years ago this week. I feel Sinn Féin are caught in a battle, and a cynical battle, for votes between the so-called far left and far right. However, the centre will hold, and it must hold. And I say that again, the centre will hold, and it must hold. Helen McEntee follows a strong list of strong Fine Gael ministers for justice who took on the organisations and individuals who wanted to overthrow and destabilise this state. People like Kevin O'Higgins, Pat Cooney, Michael Noonan and Nora Owen, to name all with you, faced the enemy of the state head-on and provided confidence and stability. I have no doubt Helen McEntee is doing this, and it's time for Helen McEntee to get on with this job.
Thank you, Deputy. And to conclude, Dr. Colin Burke.
Thank you, Laskin Cora. I very much support the Minister here tonight. I think the work she has done as Minister stands out in the sense of the work that's being done by the Gardaí on a daily basis. If you look at in the last 12 months alone, over 271 million worth of illegal drugs were seized, 1,575 firearms and over 1,780 knives and dangerous instruments, all seized. And that's because of the proactive work of the Gardaí on the ground. The work also being done by the community Gardaí. So the department, the Gardaí and the Minister are working extremely hard to make sure that we have a safe country here to live in. And I think it's important that we highlight the people who stood on the fence while this incident was going on in Dublin. The people on social media who are not prepared to come out of their houses but are prepared to use social media to provoke people. They're the real guilty people here in this whole scenario. And I think it's important that there's action taken against them. I have full confidence in the Minister, in her department and in the Gardaí. Thank you.
At the outset, I want to agree with Minister O'Gorman in relation to gender-based violence. It is not a soft issue by any manner or means. It is an issue of crucial importance that all parties must absolutely tackle. I'm aware the Minister wasn't referring to Sinn Féin in that regard, but I think it's important to put that on the record nonetheless. It's minic d'urtar I Dave Rún mi bhunaín goil níos mó fuam agus farag ná cíl. Is dul an go bhféad fia sin ará faoin rún seo cinnte. Ach níor an taobh seo atá an farag agus an fuam ná an aspa cíl ní dónam. You regularly hear in relation to confidence motions that they generate more heat than light. Well, I think in this event, I think there is a great deal of heat. There is not a lot of light nor clear-sightedness from those benches across. And we have listened to, over the last hour or so, attacks on Sinn Féin. Well, not even attacks on Sinn Féin, actually. Attacks on the party that the government would like Sinn Féin to be. the opponents that they would dearly wish to have, and frankly, it's beside the point. Frankly, it's beside the point. The government TDs are entitled to their characters. Some of them believe them, some of them less honourably don't. But that's neither here nor there. That is of no concern to communities on the ground. And when you boil this down, we are in a situation where there are less Gardaí in the streets and less Garda stations open than when Fine Gael took office. We are 2 years past the 2021 targets. And in terms of overall Garda staff, you've not only missed that in terms of enlisted Gardaí by 1,000 2 years later, in terms of overall workforce, you are 4,000 behind. 4,000 staff behind between enlisted Gardaí, Garda Reserve and civilian staff. 4,000 staff behind. That has real-world consequences. You cannot dispute that. What happened Thursday a week ago was incredibly serious. One of the worst sets of scenes we have seen in Dublin in many years. But it was far from an isolated incident. We spent the whole summer talking about antisocial behaviour and crime in the north inner city. In the last few weeks in Cork, we had a petrol bombing and 2 shootings. In the petrol bombing in Onslow Gardens, a number of children were very fortunate to escape without injury. Earlier in the year, we had other shootings and some very serious assaults and incidents. And those real-world consequences exist for Cork and many other places. In the last cohort of 126 Gardaí, 1 Garda came to Cork. We've had 4 this entire year, 10% of the population in County Cork. 4 additional Gardaí. And, you know, this has been a political issue in Cork for years now. And I've raised it directly with a number of ministers at this stage. And we have the same routine every time. A minister comes down, the local senior ministers, they meet with the superintendent, oh, things are going to change, things are going to improve, we're going to make an investment. We get a couple of probationers over Christmas and they go back home in the new year. The same thing again and again. And it's leading to the situation where communities feel neglected and terrified when incidents like what's happened in Cork City recently, what's happened in Dublin recently occurs. I had cause to ring a Garda station on Saturday night, a 24-hour Garda station, just to clarify, on behalf of a constituent. Rang 3 times, rang out every time. I don't even blame the Gardaí in that station. I'm sure they were dealing with very urgent matters. The fact is, nobody was there to pick up the pieces because the Garda station, the Gardaí have been left to absolute neglect. Way behind targets, Gardaí leaving in their absolute droves. People have talked about personalised attacks. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. I think most of us don't either. I believe that, if you let me finish, please, I believe that Minister McEntee is a decent woman. I believe she's committed to public service. I believe she has empathy. But empathy is not going to put any additional Gardaí boots on the ground where we need them on the streets. Not one bit. I'll finish on this. People have talked a lot about the spectre as they see it. I don't think the public see it like that. I don't think Gardaí on the ground see it like that either, of a Sinn Féin Justice Minister. Now, I would ask you to imagine the situation with a Sinn Féin Justice Minister who had overseen a recruitment and retention crisis and Gardaí leaving their droves, serious public order incidents for years, the big story of the summer being the north inner city being unsafe, culminating in the scenes that we saw last Thursday. And I'm asking you to imagine that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil don't put a no-confidence motion in a Sinn Féin minister. You're having an absolute laugh.
Anishik Bogarai, People Before Profit Solidarity, Dr. Paul Murphy, 4.5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. Last Count Corla. People Before Profit have no confidence in the Minister for Justice. We have no confidence in this government and we want the government to go. The government is responsible for record levels of rent, record levels of homelessness and almost record levels of house prices. The government is responsible for almost 1 million people being on some form of public health waiting lists. The government is responsible for not protecting people from the cost of living crisis, which saw corporate profits soar while ordinary people have struggled to put food on the table. The government is responsible for the deep inequality and deprivation which still exists right across our society, while private landlords make super profits, while big fossil fuel companies make super profits, while private health companies make super profits. What has that got to do with any of this? Well, it is those conditions which are exploited by the far right, turning people's legitimate anger not against those who are responsible, the government and the class that they represent, but instead blaming some of the most marginalised, some of the most vulnerable people in our society, asylum seekers, LGBTQ people and women. And how has the government responded to this abuse, to this incitement that we've seen from the far right? They've responded by conceding ground. Look at what Simon Coveney told the Financial Times just last week. He said we have to listen to people, listen to those rioters effectively, and then linked to that was the idea that asylum seekers are going to shamefully be put on the street with nothing but €75 a week. That isn't the first time. People can read the article, it's no problem. That isn't the first time. I have. That isn't the first time. The government fundamentally legitimised the rhetoric and the dehumanisation of the far right by creating an inhuman, completely unfair discrimination between asylum seekers, treating Ukrainians the way decent people would expect refugees to be treated, but treating people who are coming from other conflicts, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, in a completely inhumane way, putting people into direct provision at best, putting them onto the streets where they're vulnerable to be attacked by people whipped up by the far right at worst. We saw more of it today by the government, choosing to say that this moment is the moment, like Micheál Martin chose, to say the far left is effectively as bad as the far right, giving it about some leaflet People for Profit produced in Cork. But look, what do you say? No, I didn't. Can I suggest there was a trial about that? I think there was a trial about that.
Thank you.
It's absolutely shameful.
Deputy Murphy, through the chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Through the chair.
What's happening now? The far right is organising. We have been calling out this organising for well over a year. We've been pointing out the truth that your police force, presumably with your agreement, has taken a softly approach all through the line. The Gardaí allowed people to board buses. The Gardaí allowed far-right agitators to go in and harass librarians and harass pharmacists. The Gardaí were there just before refugees were burnt out at Sandwich Street. And where was the left in that? The left was standing with the refugees in Sandwich Street, trying to protect them from the attacks of the far right. The left was organising for the Ireland for All demonstration. Your system of deep inequality, of discrimination, creates the breeding ground for this, and then you will not take a stand against them. We have no confidence in you. What we have to look to is the movement of ordinary people, is the trade union movement. They're the only force that will be able to resist this rising menace of hatred, of division, of the far right.
Deputy McBarry, uninterrupted, please.
There was a riot organised by Ireland's far right 12 days ago, by racist organisations, by fascist organisers. Shop workers terrorised, bus workers Gardaí and firefighters attacked. And what does the Taoiseach do tonight? Instead of making criticisms when he looks around the Dáil of those deputies who promote the talking points of Ireland's far right and who have been happy to pose for photographs with some of their organisers, he instead attacks the proposers of this motion and he attacks the socialist left. The Taoiseach accused Deputy MacDonald of not giving warning in advance, but there was no shortage of warnings from various sources. On September 25th, the Irish Times ran an article headlined, "Why weren't warnings about the far-right threat taken seriously?" in which columnist Una Mullally wrote, "The political entity that has countered this threat on our streets, in communities and in Parliament most consistently is Solidarity People Before Profit." But who does the Taoiseach attack? Precisely the best anti-fascists in that regard. The Taoiseach is well aware of this, but he prefers to make cynical jibes on the floor of the Dáil rather than make a serious contribution to this debate. I want to comment on the Minister's response to the riot. It's a law and order response, and it will not work. You cannot pepper spray alienation. You cannot baton charge anger at social inequality. You cannot taser the housing crisis or use water cannon to wash away a culture of toxic masculinity. The government has failed to tackle the social crisis, which gives an audience to the far right and brought many young people out onto the streets. I have no confidence in this minister, no confidence in this government, and no confidence in the unjust social system of capitalism they defend. I will be voting no to the confidence motion tonight.
Now, Rashkaji on Realtas. 6 contributors. Minister Norma Foley, 2 minutes.
At the outset, I would like to join previous speakers in extending our support and solidarity to the children and their carer impacted by this horrific event in Parnell Square one Thursday afternoon, and also to include their wider community and most especially their school community. And I want to acknowledge also, as has already been referenced by previous speakers, amongst the first responders to that incident on Thursday afternoon were the NEP psychologists, the school psychologists from the Department of Education. There on the Thursday, there again on the Friday, and the school was closed, but working with senior management. There again over the weekend on Sunday, working with senior management. There again on the Monday, the school reopened, and there every single day to support these children and to support the school community as it finds a way forward after this horrific and tragic incident that occurred. And we tell our young people in our schools, all will be well when we work together in solidarity, when we mind each other, when we support each other, when we work as a cohesive unit. How shameful for them to see the politicking that's going on in this chamber and outside of the chamber by those who should know better, those who seek to sow division, divisiveness, those who should show leadership and solidarity and community cohesion at a time when we need it in this country. I have 100% confidence in Minister McEntee, in recognition of the strong and positive work that she does every single day in the name of communities right across this country. As the Minister for Justice, she has wide responsibilities, wide functions, chief amongst which is the tackling of crime, ensuring those that perpetrate crime are brought to justice. Minister McEntee is wholeheartedly committed to doing this in respect of those who wreaked havoc in our national capital, and I have every confidence she will succeed.
Thank you, Minister.
I expect better from leaders in politics. Our children are showing leadership. Our school communities are showing leadership. For shame on those who do not show leadership on an issue of this nature. For shame.
Minister Oisin Smith.
Lascan Corla. I was in the North Inner City with Minister Foley when this attack happened. And I think my reaction and everybody's reaction surely was the same. Absolute horror at the idea of children being stabbed on the street. And then shortly afterwards, a horrible sense and imminence that there were people on the far right who would see this as an opportunity for advantage. People who were licking their lips at the prospect, at the thought that these acts may have been carried out by somebody who was born outside of Ireland, hoping that they could react in this way, that they could gain political advantage. I didn't expect and I didn't predict what Sinn Féin's reaction to this attack would be. I did not expect to see in the Dáil chamber a photograph of a vulnerable person being held up, which clearly had the effect of encouraging suspicion towards homeless people and a sense that if when you see a homeless person on the street, that person may pose a threat to children. I think that was the wrong thing to do. I'm not saying that Sinn Féin are bad people, and I don't believe that, but I think that what you did that day was wrong. And I also think that what you're doing today is wrong. I think that attacking Minister Helen McEntee is playing into an existing far-right trope, an idea that a woman is too weak to be the Justice Minister. This is something that I see put out on social media all the time. It's pushing this idea. And what do we need? What we need is better regulation of social media using the new laws that we now have in place. We need to reassure people born outside of Ireland that they're welcome here, that they won't be subject to violent attacks, and we need to prosecute the very small number of far-right people who organise these attacks. What we don't need is this shabby pantomime that you're putting on for us today.
Just under 2 minutes.
If she won't resign, he needs to take her out.
Those are the words of a member of the front bench of a party that claim they want to be in government after the next election. And 'tis well you hang your head in shame this evening, Deputy, with words like that. Because, last Count Corla, if a male member of this House said that about a woman in this House, they'd be gone. And more shame on you, Deputy MacDonald, that you tolerate that sort of behaviour in your front bench, threatening language against a Minister for Justice, a woman Minister for Justice, who has given her life in service, which is far more than I hear from the people over there. Apology, apology, apology. For what? For the 22 children in this state who grew up fatherless because of the dead guards that were put into early graves by a year sister organisation. And 'tis well you may shake your head. We're here this evening to talk about An Garda Síochána. And in my constituency, a man was riddled on the side of the street. And what happened to his killers? They were driven out of Castlereagh prison like heroes by a former member of your front bench. So to come in here tonight and lecture us, or anyone of this House, about your newfound interest in An Garda Síochána is quite nauseating, to put it very mildly. We know that your recent attachments to certain members of the Council who have frequency in the Special Criminal Court, we all know about that. We also know about your disdain for the Special Criminal Court. Why wouldn't you have disdain for it? It has locked up more people connected to your party than any other organisation in this state. I think that tonight's motion has spectacularly backfired on you. If you talk to anybody around the country, they're disgusted that you would link the atrocious attack on a young girl to the resignation of the Minister for Justice and the Commissioner of Garda Síochána. Take a long look at yourselves.
This motion is a cynical attempt, clumsy attempt to gain political capital from a tragic incident. But thankfully the Irish people are beginning to see Sinn Féin for what they really are. A party linked to criminality, a party that has repeatedly sought to undermine our state and our institutions, a party that applauded those who took the life of one of our Gardaí. And Ceann Comhairle, it's no secret that officials in the Department of Justice are filled with dread at the prospect of a Sinn Féin Minister for Justice. But perhaps members of the Sinn Féin front bench could bring their personal experience to bear in that department. Deputies Matt Carty and Pearse Doherty could advise Gardaí on how to deal with abusive behaviour, with them both having been convicted of offences arising from such abusive behaviour towards our Gardaí on O'Connell Street. Deputy Angus O'Snuddy could advise on how to protect government buildings from a breach of security, as he has personal experience of partaking in such a breach, forcing a lone member of our Gardaí to defend himself and seek reinforcements. Ceann Comhairle, any examination of Sinn Féin's past always reveals some murky and sordid details, none more so than the details of the appalling treatment of rape victim Maria Cahill. And in her book, Rough Beast, Miss Cahill describes how the IRA used Sinn Féin's offices to question her about sexual abuse. And reading that book, we hear her words ringing out loud and clear. It is very strange to be sitting in the office of the most powerful men in Ireland and to be asked to give your opinion on whether a man should live or die. And despite repeated questioning, the leader of Sinn Féin has always refused to comment on the use of her party's offices to question a deeply vulnerable victim of rape. That, Last Ceann Comhairle, is the hallmark of Sinn Féin, a party living a dual existence, a party that has no credibility whatsoever in seeking to remove a minister with genuine justice at the heart of her work every day.
Last Ceann Comhairle, Sinn Féin's conduct this evening is nothing short of a disgrace. Its party leader has knowingly misled this Dáil, which is a shame on you, Deputy MacDonald. This vote of confidence reeks of hypocrisy and opportunism. I stand in absolute support for Minister Helen McEntee, who remains dedicated to the Department of Justice in support of An Garda Síochána in their relentless pursuit to uphold law and order, while Sinn Féin shamelessly prioritise political point scoring. Instead of showing unity and stability in the face of such heinous crimes witnessed on November 23rd, Sinn Féin choose to exploit the situation, to sow division, and in their words, to take out the Minister for Justice and the Garda Commissioner for their own political gain. Remember, Last Ceann Comhairle, Sinn Féin can never be trusted with law and order, especially when the influence of the IRA Army Council remains within their ranks. You see, Sinn Féin are a party with a dark history of condoning murder and terrorism, even against our own Gardaí and police officers. Your bullying, your vindictive threats and your malicious lawsuits against anyone who opposes you unmasks your dictatorial tactics. In the face of your shameful actions, this government stands strong, defending those who work tirelessly to protect our communities. Your vote of no confidence is nothing but a cynical ploy, and we will not be rocked by your divisive agenda.
The final speaker,
51 years ago, last Count Corla, this week, Jean McConville, a widow with 10 children, was abducted, murdered and secretly buried in my county. Nobody has been convicted of their crime, although some have been arrested and released later. I live in County Louth, which has suffered greatly even recently, because we all know about the appalling criminality and the drug intimidation that took place in Drogheda, and in particular the dismembering of a child. The answer was a government response through Minister Helen McEntee, where €16 million in additional supports have been given to the Gardaí, over 30 additional Gardaí. There's been huge investment in creches and community facilities. And that is a response that a minister needs to do. They need to tackle the underlying causes of crime, the underlying causes of the abuse of drug addiction and the appalling way that young people are faced with drugs and with the problems arising from it.
Thank you very much. Deputy Matt Carthy, of 4.5 minutes.
We have learned one thing very clearly today. This government do not like being held to account. And certainly, most of all, they do not like being held to account by Sinn Féin. What we have seen is a snobbery and condescension today that is the hallmark of a century-old cosy cartel that do not like to be challenged on their failures, especially by those who they look down on, those who broke their golden circle, which tolerated, in fact often rewarded, incompetence. But you have failed, and you will be challenged on your failures. Cancorla, confronted by their own policing failures, government are angry and they're defensive, and they've resorted to mudslinging. Rather than dealing with the issues that communities are faced with every day, they try to distract. The policing failures in our communities, crystallised by the events of the 23rd of November, cry out for accountability. The Gardaí in our communities deserve our support. They're not getting that support from this government, and from what we've heard this evening, they will not get it. Because this government and this minister are completely out of touch with how crime and antisocial behaviour have affected communities. We know the impact of these failures. We've heard of the incidents of crime on our streets, the random attacks, the workers afraid of leaving late in the evening, the no-go areas of our cities late at night, the people afraid in their own homes, the domestic violence calls unanswered, the response times that have been too slow, the victims of crimes whose lives have been changed forever, and of course the appalling failures of the 23rd of November, when innocence was shattered, when 3 children and their carer were stabbed as they left school. I want to commend the bravery of Leanne Flynn and all those who stepped in to protect those children. Cancorla, it's the job of the state to protect people, to uphold public safety. And when that doesn't happen, somebody must be held to account. When riots erupted, this minister allowed Gardaí to be sent out unprepared and under-resourced. We all saw the footage of Gardaí isolated trying to fend off attackers. They deserve better than that. That is a political failure, and that failure is on the minister. In the immediate aftermath of those failures, the minister tried to tell us that control was not lost in the city, just as for months before she had told us that Dublin city centre was safe. And no amount of mudslinging by this government will take away from the facts of their failure. There are fewer Gardaí on our streets and less Garda stations in our communities than when Fine Gael came to power 12 years ago. And coupled with that, they have fundamentally changed how our communities are actually policed. When I was growing up, everyone knew the local Gardaí, and the local Gardaí knew everyone. People felt safer. And that is no longer the case. The population has increased, our towns have grown. And in response, Fine Gael have closed Garda stations and reduced Garda numbers, and they don't like to hear it, but Cancorla, they are the facts, and it cannot continue. We called on the Minister to resign. She didn't. We cannot continue with a Justice Minister who has allowed our communities to feel increasingly unsafe. While she insists that our cities are safe, while the daily experience of everyone who lives in, who works in, visits and runs a business there says that that isn't the case. So we called on the Taoiseach to dismiss the Minister, and he didn't. You may not like to be reminded of your failures, but we will keep reminding you. And you may not like to be held to account, but we will hold you accountable. And you may refuse to listen to our communities and their concerns for public safety, but we are listening, and they are telling us that they have no confidence in this government and in this Justice Minister. You might look down on us, but we will not let you look down or fail those communities that we represent. We will hold you accountable, just as the people will get their chance to hold everybody who votes in this no confidence motion accountable when the opportunity arises. I'll be voting no confidence tonight, Cancorla.
Can I just remind members that the public are looking in, and they will be making their own judgments on what's being said on all sides of the House. So please, can we do our business in a slightly more orderly manner, please? Now we're going to the regional group. Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick is sharing with Deputy Tobin, Deputy Shanahan and Deputy Canny.
Thank you very much, Cancorla. First off, I would like to condemn the barbaric attack on 3 children and their carers. Crash manager Leanne Flynn, outside Gael Skull Carrosh on Thursday, the 23rd of November, and send my prayers to the 2 people who are still in hospital. There seems to be an idea that the Minister for Justice should have a hand-on role in the day-to-day policing. Their job is to be very clear on policy, put law in place, and ensure police have the number of resources. In September, myself and my colleagues in the regional group published a motion expressing severe concerns about regarding the ongoing challenges faced by Garda Síochána. Therefore, it would be remiss of me to bypass the fact there was a chronic shortage of resources which directly impact the force's ability to carry out its role. However, who the Minister for Justice is does not really deal with the issues that we are facing. Claims of the riots and public disorder in the aftermath of this attack could have been foreseen, prevented or contained through earlier actions are careless and plain wrong. The fact is that the hooligan culture and the criminality issues that we are facing runs much deeper than law and order. Initial protests in the city centre on Thursday were organised by anti-immigration figures who were later joined by opportunist rioters. We all heard the WhatsApp messages. They can't control us all. Let's have little splintering of doing what we do to do. What the message said, phrases such as tool up and kill any foreigners were also used. Yes, more resources are needed. We can all agree on that. However, Minister McEntee is absolutely aware of this. She is focusing on her work in the Department of Justice and supporting the Garda Síochána as they keep us safe and maintain law and order. She is doing her best. We need to stop playing political football. We need to put our heads together and action intervention that targets the issue of poverty, criminality, and then them versus us narratives that is going throughout our country culture. Rather, they see the current situation as an opportunity to take out an individual minister. Minister, I will be supporting you this evening on a motion of confidence.
Deputy Tobin, yeah.
Every year that Minister Helen McEntee has been Minister, the number of Gardaí has fallen in this country. Garda morale has collapsed. Garda recruitment is on the floor. Every single day, a Garda is violently attacked in Ireland. Gardaí are getting rammed, bitten, assaulted, and they're having chemicals sprayed in their eyes. So Garda retirements and resignations are on the increase at the moment. And in October just past, for the first time, resignations exceeded retirements for the reason of exit from the force. Prisons are now so overcrowded that Minister McEntee is letting criminals out on temporary release to make space for other criminals. Now, all of this has consequences. Crime, lawlessness are making no-go zones out of the city centres and villages around the country. Murder is on the increase. Sexual assault has doubled in 10 years. Rape has doubled in 10 years. Domestic violence has tripled in the last 10 years. Serious unprovoked attacks are now commonplace. And there's also a direct correlation between the fall in the number of Gardaís and the level of increase of fatalities on the roads in this country. We have the lowest number of Gardaí policing the roads since 2009. Behaviour is changing on the roads, and that has led to the increase in fatalities in the last number of years. And all of this before we actually get to the issue of the riots in our capital, the worst riots in generations. Now, I spoke to Gardaí on the day, and they told me that many of them were mobilised not by Garda order, but by other fellow Gardaís screaming on WhatsApp groups for help. They told me that they didn't get mobilised until 6 and 7 o'clock, that they went to Santry. Santry was in pandemonium, that they hadn't enough helmets or shields or body armour to deal with it, that through traffic it took at least 1 hour to get to the city centre. Garda lives were placed in danger that day. We were lucky that we didn't lose the life of a Garda in that situation. And those images were beamed across the world of our capital in flames. The Minister lost control of our capital city. The Minister will win this no confidence vote, not in a record, but because this government is an accountability-free zone. If there's no accountability, there will be no change.
Deputy Shanahan.
I vote on a case-by-case basis, which is evidenced by the many times my vote find fault with government actions versus objectives. But to the matter on hand, I have little confidence that Dublin is entirely safe. I have little confidence that the important reforms and modernisation of policing in the country is progressing at the pace required. Little confidence too that the Gardaí are appropriately and fully supported, that they are equipped and remunerated for their work, which is a very different job to that of the job of decades ago. I have little confidence that there is anything like the follow-through that our aspirational warm welcome to inward migration demands in terms of practical administration, resourcing, support, accommodation, schooling, language, labour market and cultural integration. It is unfortunately largely a mess and one that needs assertive action now. In a regional group motion that we placed in September, we discussed the subject of policing, and I found the government position to be very much of their own view. I think the benefits of high office showing. I believe that the message must get through to government that all voices must be heard. But regarding confidence, I am anxious that this government be forced to stay in office, largely so that they can be seen to deliver what they promised to me and my constituents, to deliver the 24/7 cardiac care and health equality to UHW, having forced the blasted technological university on us to deliver the new courses, capacity and buildings in the region that remain elusive to this point, and to deliver the Waterford Airport runway extension in the North Quays and a fair share from the 13 billion capital expenditure this year. But on these points, Ceann Comhairle, let me be clear. Opposition parties have made no promises to the South East, and therefore I have no incentive to give them a whirl with Mercs and Perks and the ritzy new government jet. I have and I remain intent on holding government to their promises, and so for that reason I will be voting confidence.
Deputy Canny.
First of all, my sincere opinion is that having a vote of confidence in any minister at this stage is wrong, for the simple reason that what we are doing is we're giving a status to the people who wreaked havoc on our streets in our city. It is unthinkable that they would get one up on democracy by having a minister lose her job over this. I think what we have to do is focus in on the Gardaí and how we can help them. And I think about the young Gardaí who are coming out of Templemore this week and next week to join the force over the Christmas period. A lot of them will come to Dublin, and they are brave enough to come up to Dublin and to participate in the Garda force. And I'm proud of every one of them, and I think we should remember that. I also think we should remember the Gardaí that were out on duty that night. They are fathers, they are mothers, they could be brothers or sisters, they could have parents looking on what was going on. And I think today, with the backing over we've had here, we've shown a disregard for our Gardaí. We haven't spoken about them and we haven't given them the plaudits that they do require and need and deserve. And I think today is a day to do that. I think both sides of the House need to wise up a small bit and make sure that whatever we do, we get a whole-of-government approach to solving the issues that are there. It's not one minister or it's not one department. Right across government, we need to see everybody putting their shoulder to the wheel, and we need opposition coming in behind them to make sure that we save democracy and we do not let it out of our hands into the people who were on the streets last week. Thank you, Ken Corley.
Thank you, Deputy Kenny. Now we move to Minister Harris, sharing with Ministers Coveney and Brown and Deputy Flanagan, Durcan and Troy.
Thanks, Ken Corley. I have full confidence in my friend and colleague, Minister Helen McEntee. I'm proud of her. I'm proud of her work. Ken Corley, the Irish people wanted political leaders to stand united behind the Gardaí, behind our Minister for Justice and against the thugs who set this city alight. The Minister wanted to park politics. She picked up the phone and offered that to the Leader of the Opposition, but they refused. Minister McEntee and the Government support the Gardaí. We stand with them, we stand with Garda families. Contrast that with Deputy MacDonald, a deputy who threw a party for a man who collected a Garda killer from the prison gates. A deputy who would appoint people to cabinet who have been arrested and charged for abusing Gardaí, who would appoint people who have evaded the arrest of the Gardaí. Such people are sitting on those Sinn Féin benches. Deputy MacDonald wanted people to hashtag make the change and vote for a popular and respected member of the community. That person turned out to be the waterboarding torturer, Jonathan Dowdall. What pathetic judgment. Now, Sinn Féin have had a good run, but people are starting to see that nothing is more important to Sinn Féin than Sinn Féin. Wherever the wind blows, Sinn Féin goes. They're in favour of increased health budgets, but they actually promise less than the government delivers. They're in favour of home ownership, while opposing every single support we put in place to help people buy their own home. They're in favour of building more houses, while opposing 800 houses in this city alone this year. In favour of tackling climate action, while opposing every action that we need to take. They're pro-European, but they voted against every referendum on Europe, including the one to join it. And apparently they're pro-free media, despite 18 legal actions being taken by their party and God knows how many other legal letters sent. Well, the Irish people can see through them, because on the big issues and on the big days, one thing is consistent. They're always on the wrong side. People want unity, they want division. Sinn Féin is now following the populist playbook, a playbook that elected a reality TV star as President of the United States and sent Nigel Farage to Europe. Maybe Mary Lou could join them on the next reality TV show. I'm a populist, get me out of here. They attack the media, they demonise and dehumanise their opponents, they call for heads, they offer no solutions, they exploit every crisis, and this is the worst example of it, because Sinn Féin's priority, Ceann Comhairle, is and only ever will be Sinn Féin.
Mr. Coveney.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. First of all, I want to categorically state my full support for a friend and colleague, Minister Helen McEntee, and for the Garda Commissioner. There are moments in politics when raw hypocrisy needs to be called out. The idea that Sinn Féin now presents itself as the defender of law and order and the Garda Síochána is difficult for this party to stomach. Sinn Féin is the only party in this House who has publicly supported murderers of An Garda Síochána. This is a party with a TD convicted by the Special Criminal Court and sentenced to 10 years in prison. This is a party who walks out of this House literally when asked to confirm support for the Special Criminal Court. This is a party with a current frontbench member who tried to storm this House from Merrion Street with a group of protesters in 2010, forcing Gardaí to draw batons to protect themselves and these houses. This is a party whose leader, even this evening, decided deliberately, in my view, to mislead the chamber, to sow further division and fear, even amongst such a vulnerable community as parents and staff in a vulnerable school in the context that we have this debate. So let me say this. I believe that our Minister for Justice has more integrity than Sinn Féin has in its entire organisation. I believe that the Garda Commissioner, whose father, let's not forget, was murdered by the IRA in his car on his way to church with his wife, has more integrity and has done more for the people of this island, north and south, in terms of law and order than any of you on the benches opposite. We all in this House have work to do to respond to the threat of the far right and the division and hate that they seek to create. But I trust Minister McEntee and Commissioner Harris to give the leadership needed to face down that challenge, and I believe the country does too.
Minister James Brown.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. I stand to express my confidence in Minister McEntee, and it is indeed an honour to serve with her in the Department of Justice. My primary thoughts this evening are with those children and with the creche worker who were injured on that day. and my thanks to the members of the public and the emergency workers and indeed the healthcare workers who all rushed to the scene on that occasion. And out of that tragedy, the far right saw an opportunity and took it to create division, to sow misinformation and to whip up fear. And what followed in Dublin City later that evening was an absolute disgrace and brought shame on themselves. Thugs saw an opportunity and took it to cause violence, destruction and fear. And again, our emergency workers responded with bravery and responded swiftly to the scene to defend the communities. And Sinn Féin saw an opportunity and took it. Their response to an unimaginable tragedy and violence and fear in our communities was to rush out and instrumentalise that tragedy. When there was a threat to democracy and the ship needed to be steadied, Sinn Féin's first instinct was to try and tip it over. And when they realised they had completely misjudged the public's response, they found someone who couldn't defend themselves, paraded their photo around the place, they punched down. And of course, punching down when in trouble is a red flag for populists right across the world. Sinn Féin this evening has stood up and to raise their support for An Garda Síochána. So let's remember their record, and one in particular of them and their sister organisation, the IRA, in my own county of Wexford. When Garda Seamus Quaid was murdered by the IRA, whose family had to remove his memorial in protest to Sinn Féin holding their Ardesh in the county of Wexford. Sinn Féin spent decades undermining law and order in this state with deadly consequences. Around the time of the tragedy in the North Inner City, I was in the North Inner City on Green Street, where I was speaking at the SAIL project, a community project that deals with women of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence and also with addiction issues. And I'll repeat what I said there at that event, that a number of people are criticising Minister McEntee with derogatory comments around woke issues. Domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is a law and order issue. Domestic and sexual gender-based violence is a serious crime. And Minister McEntee deserves credit for work in that area, not to be discredited. Thank you.
Deputy Charles Flanagan.
McEntee and Commissioner Drew Harris in their work, particularly at this time of challenge to the state from both the far right and the far left. Indeed, the first duty of any state is the safety and security of its citizens. In this regard, Fine Gael has never been found wanting. It faced down decades of threats from Sinn Féin, IRA and the broader Republican movement of a most brutal type. When Sinn Féin speak about law and order and the rule of law, it brings to mind loyal and dedicated members of An Garda Síochána who were murdered by the Republican movement and indeed the bereaved families. I recall Garda Richard Fallon, Inspector Samuel Donegan, Garda Michael Reynolds, Garda Michael Tarkin near my own home, Garda John Morley, Garda Henry Byrne, Garda Seamus Quaid, Garda Patrick Reynolds, Recruit Garda Gary Sheehan, Garda Frank Hand, Sergeant Patrick Morrissey, Detective Garda Jerry McCabe, Garda Tony Golden, Garda Adrian Donoghue. How many of these brutal murders of members of An Garda Síochána in the course of their duty have been condemned by Sinn Féin? How many were not? The record speaks for itself. Indeed, we remember Senator Billy Fox from our own political family. We will take no lecture from Sinn Féin on rule of law and law and order. In the 1970s, Fine Gael took vital steps to protect the integrity and security of the state, putting the interests of the country before electoral politics. Indeed, 20 years later, Fine Gael, with the assistance of the Criminal Assets Bureau, took on and repelled organised gangs in Dublin. We're doing the same now with Commissioner Harris and Minister McEntee. So rather than make a positive and constructive contribution in the provision of solutions, we see Sinn Féin again reverting to type, pulling down the institutions of the state. We've seen it north, we now see it south. I reject that and I support Minister McEntee.
Just over a minute and a half left, Deputy Durkin and then Deputy Troy.
Thank you, Cancorla. In the aftermath of the situation that unveiled itself in the inner city in recent times, I think it falls upon us all in this House to put our support behind the Minister and behind the Commissioner of An Garda Síochána to ensure that law and order remains a central facet of our lives. If it doesn't, If it doesn't, then turmoil follows. And I would point out that when Kristallnacht was in hand in the 1930s in Central Europe, the hard right and the hard left were on the streets in common cause, protesting against what? But what it amounts to in this particular situation, Cancola, is, I believe, this. The public want a response from the public, from the people of this House, to what happened in the inner city, where the cars were burned, where other vehicles were burned, public transport vehicles were burned, and where people were held up across the globe as being an unsavoury place to live, and huge damage was done. The response that comes from this House now must be to support and God, the Chicago Commissioner and the Minister for Justice. And I don't think that all of Sinn Féin are bad. I think that there's some people across there who wouldn't want to go this way. And I would appeal to them to think carefully about it. Because the opposition of today could be the government of tomorrow. We never know when or where. And the fact will be called upon, you will be called upon again at some stage, everybody in this House, to stand up and be counted on which side we are on. There can be no side when it comes to the kind of violence that we saw in the streets of our city and which were portrayed all over the world.
We're out of time and we have no time for Deputy Troy. Apologies. Deputy Matty McGrath sharing with Deputies Collins, Healy Reyes and Nolan.
Good Cancola, and our first instance, our prayers and thoughts are with the young children and their carer and the whole school community of Scoilmera. Look, this didn't happen. All this, that was a terrible incident, but this incident in Dublin, it didn't happen overnight. The Gardaí have been demoralised. We saw when 99% of them voted no confidence in the Commissioner. This didn't happen under Deputy Minister McEntee's watch either. Under your watch, Minister Flanagan, and under Minister Shatter before you. And before that, it's interesting tonight you're all standing up talking about your friend and colleague, the Minister. Francis Fitzgerald was a friend of yours too, and a Minister, so was Alan Shatter. What happened to him? So I'd look in the mirror if I was ye. But getting back to what's at hand here today, ye have neglected and not resourced and supported the Gardaí. Ye have neglected and not supported the Gardaí, and they're under-resourced, and morale was never as low. And that's a pity, because we who support the Gardaí, we need them. We need them. It's a very thin line between anarchy and what good living and what we need. I salute the Gardaí that travelled from all over the country last week, of their own volition, men and women, travel long distance to help their colleagues and regain the capital streets of our city. I salute them and support them, but we must support them. So I was all for a commissioner outside the state, but this commissioner hasn't worked out, unfortunately. And the carry on with you not supporting the Gardaí. And every piece of legislation that's come in by you in the last number of years has been anti-Gardaí, not supporting them, not giving them the tools of the trade, not allowing them to do what they're supposed to do. So I think that's more on true a road chin. So unfortunately, I can't support you tonight, Minister, because I've expressed no confidence in you before and the Commissioner.
Deputy Collins.
Thank you. Minister, Gardaí morale is at an all-time low. There is no Garda leadership in this country. Garda stations have been closed. Crime is on the rise in our cities and countrysides, and people are feeling in danger well before the outbreak of this recent mindless crime in Dublin, where our capital was in grave danger. I see it from myself, Minister. Shocking scenes by night, and you are in complete denial. Ministers are pointing at far-right people that cause these crimes. This is ministers and politicians in denial and trying to point the finger of blame onto someone instead of the lunatics where the blame should be pointed at. Minister, one Monday, a couple of months ago, you stated all's okay, please come to our capital, it's a safe place to come to. And just a few days later, you allocate millions from your department to the Garda force in Dublin to tackle the crisis and safeguard the people who live or visit our capital. I would much more prefer today that the motion was on our Garda Commissioner, as the buck has to lie on his lap as to what goes on in relation to crime in this country. And he has failed miserably, Minister. He does not have the confidence in his own Garda force, and it is easy to see why, after watching the scenes nearly 2 weeks ago, where members of the Garda Síochána were disgracefully kicked around Dublin. This Garda force needs strong leadership, and at this time the confidence is at an all-time low in their leadership. I also have serious concerns about the number of extra guards being moved to Dublin. These guards must be coming from rural communities, leaving these communities wide open for crime.
Thank you very much, Caller. First of all, Minister, I can't support you here tonight. I think that Sinn Féin are actually wrong in what they're doing tonight. The timing isn't right. But the reason I can't support you is not because of the riots, not because of anything like that, but because when our hard-working Gardaí wanted you to support them, you supported a commissioner who didn't have the confidence of 97 or 98% of the hard-working Gardaí in this country. And on behalf of the Gardaí in County Kerry, I can't express confidence in you tonight, no more than I could express confidence in the Commissioner, only for the good work of the GRA and their hard-working representatives up and down the length and breadth of this country. That Commissioner was not listening to, or he wasn't working for our Gardaí. He was pulling against them instead of pulling with them. He was divisive, he was upsetting to them. At a time when we needed the government to support the Guards, the government did not support the Guards. So at the same time, I don't agree with the time of it, but to answer the question honestly, do I have confidence in you here tonight? I'm very sorry, but I don't, or I can't, and that's the way I will be voting. And every one of the people who have been contacting me know that that is my feeling on the matter. And I just want to express my sincere prayers and sympathies to the people that were injured. I hope that they will make a recovery, and to thank the Gardaí, to thank the ambulance people, to thank the emergency personnel and the bystanders who assisted on that evening.
Carl Nolan.
I also want to begin by wishing all involved in the brutal stabbing a speedy recovery. My thoughts and prayers are with them all at this time. Minister, I want to make one thing very clear. My lack of confidence in you is based on my assessment of the failures that you have overseen at policy level, and it is certainly not personal, because I do not agree with personal attacks. I accept that you have done some good work in the area of domestic violence and violence against women, and that should be acknowledged. But at the same time, the Department of Justice under your watch has overseen a complete breakdown in the morale among rank and file Gardaí. The Department has utterly failed to ensure that our immigration and entry procedures in this state are robust. You have become a distraction to the kind of focus that the Department of Justice and the ministry that you hold doesn't require at this time. As long as we are talking about you, and indeed the Garda Commissioner, who I don't have confidence in either, we are not talking about the issues that really matter to people. We need to address those issues. No one has the right to hold the office you hold. It is a trust and privilege, and I'll end on that.
45 seconds.
Look, these thugs and brigades do not deserve the name of any political category. Calling them far right or right. They're thugs, they're brigades, and they're thieves and robbers. And that's what they are. I can't support you, Minister, because you haven't supported the Gardaí. The Gardaí right around the country, whether it is Kerry, whether it is Dublin, whatever, you're supporting a commissioner that doesn't have the support of the Gardaí. So the critical question is, what the amount of time that was lost in mobilising more Gardaí and bringing them into O'Connell Street? There was crucial time lost there. And were they up here and minding Leinster House?
Sorry now, the time is up.
And why weren't they directed? Why didn't they get a direction from higher authority to go down there? They didn't get it.
Please. Deputy Fitzmaurice, you're sharing. You're sharing with Deputy Wynne and Deputy McNamara.
Yeah, and McNamara.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for the opportunity in speaking on this. On a personal basis, Minister, I get on well with you, but I think that the Garda Commissioner has lost the dressing room completely, and I think our thoughts have to be with the people that got hurted before those rights, the people that were stabbed, and we wish those people well. And I hear all this talk about far right, and yes, there are extreme people in this country, but basically, to put it simple, it was Yabos thugs that basically, when setting Garda cars on fire, that when setting the trams or the Lewis and buses on fire, the people that probably never worked a day in their life. And what worries me is that one time ago, I remember when the Troubles were in the north, there was about 3,500 Gardaí. We had about 4,000 Gardaí less at that stage. Now we have 5,300 civilians as well. And neither in the countryside or in the city have we enough of cover, whatever has gone wrong. Someone needs to explain that. And in relation to, say, in young Gardaí, and I hear this day in, day out, and I think every one of us hears it, people leaving the force, and we've seen it. I've seen it the same as anybody else. But the funny thing about it, and the real kick in the teeth, some of these young people would be driving 120 or 30 miles a day because they can't afford accommodation, 1,500 to 2,000 a month in Dublin. And the people that were out writing the other night will probably get a house after 7 or 8 years. We'll get the dole every week. And the person that's trying to mind the state can't afford accommodation in our city. And I think we need to look at what's going on in this country. We're gone too, politically correct, and we're afraid to say a lot of stuff. There's a huge problem as well in rural Ireland. Garda stations were closed, but there's every night now we see on social media where community alerts are basically constantly putting out messages where there's a break-in. And look, I believe that the Commissioner has lost the dressing room, and the day that you walked up that street 2 or 3 months ago with a few guards by your side and said Dublin is safe, that's the day I closed the book on it. That's the day I lost faith. Thank you.
Thanks very much. There's a lot of personalities involved in this and criticism of people's personalities on both sides of this House. For me, this is not about personalities at all, for what it's worth. The Minister is a fine person and a relatively competent politician, but there has to be political accountability in this House, in this democracy, for health services, for security services. And unfortunately, there are less Gardaí in the state now, 4,000 Gardaí. There are about a little under 14,000 now. There were a little under 18 at the start of this Dáil term. And of those Gardaí, they're spending more time behind computers. And it's annoying them personally. They're losing confidence in their Garda management. Now, you might say, well, what's that got to do with the Minister? But it is the role of the government to put a management in place in the health service or in Garda Síochána that is able to do the job and that is resourced to do the job. Now, it is very clear from the Gardaí, the rank-and-file Garda's views, responses and votes with regard to the GRA, that they don't have confidence. So either the problem is resources or Garda management, but either way, Minister, that becomes your problem because you are the one who is accountable to this House for that. And I regret not being able to express confidence in you. I hope that you will recruit a lot more Gardaí. I hope you will develop systems whereby they have more time on the beat and they're not tied up as much behind their desks. Because all I can go on is what I'm seeing in my constituency and what I'm hearing in my constituency. And all of that lack of Gardaí on the beat is resulting in increasing antisocial behaviour, not just in the streets of Dublin, but in the streets of Ennis. And that is a problem because people widely are expecting now that Gardaí will be transferred from rural towns to Dublin. But there isn't the capacity for that. So there is a real problem with policing in this state, Minister, and there has to be political accountability. And it's not that I take any pleasure in not voting confidence in a minister, but there has to be a political accountability, and on that basis I really regret that I can't express confidence in the government on this issue. I'm giving the rest of our time to Deputies McSherry and
Deputy Wynne, you've a little over 2 minutes.
First thing I want to do is express best wishes to those victims who are continuing to recover following the attacks of 2 weeks ago, and to condemn the wanton violence and thuggery of those recent events. There's no excuse for it, there's no place in our society. I'll be supporting the Minister because, as I've said to much media during the week, what I'd much prefer us do and focus on as an entire House is to make the urgent adjustments that the people now require. And they're the working people of Ireland in the centre to see the adjustments to our policy on justice and immigration. On the Gardaí, the government must be less dismissive of the fact there is a morale issue, that there is a retention issue. The Commissioner must seek to build confidence that he has clearly lost. And in that regard, I'd most respectfully suggest that he cease his policy that seemed to be continuing of the transposition of the senior PSNI south of the border, which in my view does not build confidence and morale among his own people. On immigration, I am in favour of immigration. I worked abroad and we must do everything we can in line with our capacity. Sadly, despite being advised by me and many others in this House, we persisted in this House developing a very unique, bespoke and outlier approach, particularly since the war in the Ukraine, that Middle Ireland is sick of. People fleeing the war in Ukraine will get €220 a week. If I'm fleeing the war in Syria, I get €38 a week. The Department of Integration, in direct competition with Minister O'Brien, has in effect contributed and driven the price of rent up 12%, making multi-millionaires out of anyone with a bed to offer. That has exacerbated our housing problems. Now, when there's an elephant in the room, mention it. I've been called a racist for mentioning it at every opportunity over the last year and a half. Colleagues, all of us need to welcome what we can, but wake up to the fact that there is no centralised European approach to this.
Thank you, Deputy.
And we are doing much more than many other countries, and the people in Middle Ireland want to see us stand up. Thank you.
Deputy Valentine Wynne, you have 2 minutes.
Ceann Comhairle. So here we are, and what an absolute colossal waste of time this has been, which I'm sure everyone at home watching will agree. It would have been much more beneficial, and I would have preferred if we were here debating a motion that would have highlighted a constructive argument towards solutions such as a motion on crime and policing, or a focus on public safety, or even a motion on what should be done about the GRA's nearly unanimous no confidence vote earlier this year. But instead, we stand here wasting 2 hours and 27 minutes and more of Dáil time in the second last week of the year's term. A complete farce if I've ever seen one, and that has to be said. This is all because of a political stunt that has gone way too far. We need leaders in this country who will do more, and I would have hoped that with the little time we've left before Christmas, that the finger was pulled out. It would have been great to see such a focus on the need for the greatest winter initiative for the homeless people it put in place. We lost over 400 people on our streets last year, and we do not need or want to lose another soul. There is a cold snap coming, and we should not be losing people on our streets in 2023, and definitely not down to the fact that everyone in here wants to be in power. And that, let's be real here, isn't that really what these motions of confidences are about? We've had many now in this Dáil term, and none have come close to winning. I honestly do not like it when the public are in effect picked up and dropped with each one of these motions. This motion is another example of just how detached the political system is in its entirety.
Thank you very much. Minister McEntee, please.
Thank all deputies for their contributions to this evening's debate. I know the thoughts of everyone in the House very much remain with the victims of the appalling attack which took place 12 days ago outside Gaelscoil Coláiste Mhuire, and my thoughts in particular are with the young child and her carer, who are both still in a critical condition in hospital, and of course we are all wishing for their full recovery. I know Deputy MacDonald has left the chamber, and I think my colleagues have responded to her comments well, but if I could just say one more thing. Both myself and Deputy MacDonald attended a meeting recently, and we both know what was asked of us by parents, and Deputy MacDonald has failed miserably this evening to fulfil that request by parents. It's a great honour to be Minister for Justice, Ceann Comhairle. I see it as my duty to build stronger, safer communities, to ensure that people are safe, that they feel safe, to support victims, to back on Garda Síochána, our court service, our prison officers, and to use the time that I have as Minister for good. And there are challenges. I've never said there aren't. Of course there are challenges. But I believe that we are making real progress in addressing them. Resourcing our Gardaí, tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, introducing tougher sentences, and giving communities a real say in how they can be part of safety in their own community. All of this being progressed under my watch. And of course, we all want more Gardaí. But we have a larger budget than ever before. €2.31 billion will be spent next year, a 23% increase, again, since I became Minister. Recruitment into Garda Síochána is building momentum following a closure post-COVID. People might not want to admit that, but the college was closed to new recruits for almost 2 years. We would have had 1,000 additional Gardaí to what we have now if it had not closed. Again, we can ignore it, but it is a fact. Between 700 and 800 new recruits will enter into the college this year. That momentum will continue, and next year we will have a new recruitment campaign for Garda Síochána and for our Garda Reserve. We've increased the training allowance by 2/3. We've increased the age at which members can enter into Garda Síochána from 35 to 50. We've also increased the staff by over 50% since 2015. These are staff doing excellent work, but also they've freed up 900 members on the front line, and we will do more. Not just to support new members, but also those who are current members of Garda Síochána. We're building new stations. We have the highest number of Garda cars and vans ever. as Gardaí build international law enforcement coalitions to bring crime gangs who spread misery in our communities to justice, we support them. Again, that includes government today, only today, deciding to open negotiations with the United Arab Emirates on an extradition treaty. I've passed a series of laws to protect victims, to punish perpetrators. We've doubled the maximum sentence for assault causing harm. We've increased the sentence for conspiracy to murder to life. I've worked with colleagues in government to increase the sentence for assaulting a Garda member or an emergency worker. I've worked with Deputy Naughton across the House to improve post-release supervision for sex offenders. We have standalone offences of stalking and non-fatal strangulation. And only last Wednesday, we passed legislation to allow Gardaí to roll out body-worn cameras, starting in Dublin city centre next year. And I will introduce facial recognition technology to support Gardaí even further. Corley, tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, as colleagues have alluded to, it has been one of my top priorities. And I've been very fortunate on some occasions to have the full support of the House. I was glad to have the support of Deputy Daly, Deputy O'Riordan and others when we passed the bill to establish a new domestic violence agency called CUAN, one which will be up and running in January. Legislation to update our incitement to hatred laws, to introduce hate crimes, again was supported almost unanimously in this House. Our zero tolerance plan, I believe, will have a real effect in taking the epidemic of domestic violence and dealing with it once and for all. It is important to remember what we're talking about. Every single day in this country, women are being abused, strangled, beaten. They're victims of coercive control. They're stalked. They're sometimes stabbed, and even worse. So we're doubling the number of refuges to support them. We'll have dedicated family courts to meet the needs of families at moments of real difficulty. We're reforming education and raising awareness of the real attitudes which underpin so much of this violence and abuse. Working with Deputy Howland, again, across the House, we enacted laws to criminalise intimate image abuse. I've increased funding to frontline organisations who protect victims to record levels. I've established a victims forum to make sure that all victims of every crime have a say when it comes to laws, when it comes to policy, when it comes to services. And separate to these issues, we've introduced a series of measures to help bring down the cost of insurance. We've rebalanced the duty of care, and building on the wonderful work of my colleague Deputy Flanagan, I introduced personal injury guidelines. I have a plan to build 600 more prison spaces, and to Deputy O'Riordan's point, actions have been brought forward to deal with mental health and addiction problems with prisoners. Actions from an excellent plan set about and chaired by your own colleague or former colleague Kathleen Lynch. We've appointed 24 additional extra judges this year to speed up our courts. This is the record that I stand on, and I am proud to stand over. I've also listened to those who have concerns about safety in Dublin. We have a wonderful capital city, enriched by the many nationalities in it. I understand that every person living in it, working in it, who visits it, wants to feel safe and be safe. And I know that that's not always the case. I know that. I've listened to the experiences of those living and working in the city, not just in the last few weeks, but over the last number of years. And that is why we opened O'Connell Street Station. That's why we reopened Fitzgibbon Street Station. That's why we launched Operation Citizen to prioritise high visibility policing. That's why 10 million in extra overtime was allocated to complement the work of the 3,742 Gardaí who currently work in Dublin. But we all know that policing cannot solve it alone. We've all said this in the chamber here. We must be mindful of the responsibility that we ask of our city centre in shouldering accommodating many vulnerable people. I've established a new partnership in the North Inner City, and that's to bring everybody around the table. On Garda Síochána, members of the Oireachtas and local representatives, community representatives, health providers, education providers, all with the intention of making sure that everybody has a say in their safety. We've doubled funding to youth justice, working closely with Minister Brown. And because of the reforms of An Garda Síochána, we now have dedicated community policing teams in our city centre, further strengthening the bonds between Gardaí and the communities that they serve. And of course, the more Gardaí we have, the stronger those teams can be. Corla, the scenes we saw in Dublin on the 24th or 23rd of December were disgraceful. Apologies. Seeing people exploit an appalling attack on school children to loot, to riot and burn shocked us all, and these thugs and criminals will be brought to justice. An Garda Síochána contained the riot, they restored law and order in the space of hours, and the men and women who put themselves at risk will always have my support. The same cannot be said for Sinn Féin. It has been quick to fall back on its usual playbook of division and disunity, of using an appalling situation to play politics and to point score, and to once again undermine An Garda Síochána. It's worth repeating, Ceann Comhairle, when I pick up the phone to ring the Garda Commissioner or to talk to Gardaí, it's to offer support. When Sinn Féin pick up the phone, it's to call for the resignation of the Commissioner. It's 12 days on, a week since the last debate, and nothing constructive has come from Sinn Féin benches. When people want stability, they want instability. Their mantra is to sack, sue and bully. Deputy MacDonald wants to fire the Garda Commissioner. Deputy O'Brien wants to fire civil servants who disagree with him. When we need calm heads, when our own citizens are in trouble abroad, they want to expel ambassadors. When journalists report facts freely and fairly, what do? They sue. Anyone in their own party with an independent thought is bullied until they comply or leave. It might surprise Deputy MacDonald to know that this is not an episode of The Apprentice. You can't fire your way out of a situation. It's a serious business that requires judgment and leadership qualities she and her party repeatedly failed to show. So let's ask ourselves, Ceann Comhairle, if Sinn Féin were in government, if Deputy MacDonald was Taoiseach, after sacking the Minister for Justice, after sacking the Garda Commissioner, who would she turn to for advice on security and policing? Would it be the same Republican family who said it was okay to ignore COVID rules for a political funeral? The same group of people she consulted before she unashamedly politicised policing in the past, because it is nothing new. When Gerry Adams was arrested and questioned as part of the investigation into the murder of Jean McConville, she said that it was politically contrived. She immediately sought to undermine the Commissioner when he was appointed in 2018, and now again Sinn Féin attacks the Commissioner and our Gardaí again, time and time again. And I will quote a line that I know Deputy MacDonald will know, because she quotes this poet regularly. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. No matter how they try to fool the Irish people, their first instincts are still the same: undermine and attack our Gardaí, sow disunity and division, when people want unity and when they want leadership. It's been a difficult few weeks, Ceann Comhairle, for the victims, above all, of the recent attack, for their families, for their communities, and they remain at the forefront of my mind. So too is the safety of Irish people. All of my actions during this time in office have been taken to make sure that people are safe and that they feel safe. It is for that reason that I will continue to work to build stronger, safer communities, and I will not be deterred by a Sinn Féin party which seeks to show division and disunity for its own ends.
Thank you, Minister. Now, the Taoiseach has proposed a motion of confidence in the Minister for Justice, and the question is that the motion be agreed to. Is the motion agreed? Not agreed. Le chapti tar hevna tarish can aberdis ta. In a gunna Neil. Stolim Gullin Kesh Stritch, I believe the question is carried. Vote hall. Clerk will ring the bells. Designated seats, members, please. Will members please take their designated seats? Motion regarding confidence in the Minister for Justice. The question is that the motion be agreed to, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers Thaw, Minister Hildegard Naughton and Deputy Cormac Devlin, Neil, Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin and Deputy Denise Mitchell. Thaw 83, Neil 63. There was one abstention. The motion is agreed to. Con Ruin Ritchie.